Affairs Committee. I am Sen Tom Brewer, representing the 43rd Legislative District of Western Nebraska, and I serve as the chair of this committee. The committee will take up bills in the order that they're posted on the agenda today. Our hearing today is your public part of the legislative process. This is your opportunity to express your position on the proposed legislation before us. Committee members may come and go during the hearing. This is just part of the process. They have bills to introduce in other committees. Senator Aguilar is recovering from knee surgery, will not be with us today, and Senator Hunt is busy running about in other committees presenting, and then she'll be with us as our fourth bill today. I ask you to abide by the following procedures to better facilitate today's proceedings. Please silence your cell phones or any electronic devices. Please move to the reserved chairs when you are ready to testify on the given bill that you're going to testify on. These are basically all the chairs in the front row here. The introducing senator will make the initial statement, followed by the proponents, the opponents, and then the neutral. Closing remarks reserved for the introducing senator. If you're planning to testify today, please pick up one of the green sheets back on the table, fill it out legibly, and be ready to turn it in when you come forward to testify. You can either turn it in to the committee clerk or one of the pages. If you do not wish to testify but want a record of your presence here today, there's a white sheet on the table, and you can fill that out. If you have any handouts, we ask you to provide 10 copies. If you don't have 10 copies, please let the pages know so that we can make copies for you. When you come up to testify, please speak into the microphone and clearly give us your name, and then spell your name, both first and last names, for the record. Today we'll be using the 3-minute testifying time on our timer. We'll give you 2 minutes in the green light, 1 minute in the amber, and then when the red comes on and the audible hits, you know you're done. No display of support or opposition to bills, local or otherwise, will be allowed from the audience. And our committee members that are here with us today will introduce themselves, starting on my right.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jane Raybould, representing Legislative District 28, which is in the heart of Lincoln.
Good afternoon. I'm Rita Sanders. I represent District 45, which is the Bellevue Offense community.
Good afternoon, John Lowe, District 37, Gibbon, Shelton, and Kearney.
Good afternoon, Steve Halloran. I represent the heart of Nebraska, Adams County, Phelps County, and Kearney County.
Senator Sanders is the vice chair of the committee. Dick Clark is the legal counsel. Julie Conham is the committee clerk. And our pages are Logan, raise your hand, and Luke. All right. So with that, we will go ahead and move to our first bill today, which is LR4CA. And we'll pause just a moment. All right, no worries. We'll just stand by. No rush. Oh, yeah, we have a group of students here today.
Yeah.
Where are you guys from?
Central Valley.
Oh, well, thanks for being here. How many are here as students? Oh, very nice.
Nice.
Well, thanks for being here. Senator Cavanaugh, welcome to the government committee. We were just getting to know some of our crowd here today.
Thank you. Sorry for
No.
the delay.
No worries. Welcome to the government committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Brewer, members of the government committee. My name is Michaela Kavanaugh, MACHAELA CAVANAUGH, and I represent District 6, West Central Omaha. I'm here today to introduce LR4CA. This is not the first time I've introduced this, and Chairman Brewer, I think you have been here for all of them. And essentially, this is a constitutional amendment to reinstate voting rights for convicted felons. We, a few years ago, passed reinstating voting rights 2 years after, I think, release. And I believe that Senator Wayne has a bill to just upon release. This would never take the voting rights away to begin with. It is in our Constitution that we take away voting rights when you commit a felony. And so that is why it has to be a constitutional amendment. So this is just step one. It does not keeps the exception for treason. So if you commit treason, this bill would not change your voting rights. And let's see here. I think that's probably basically it. You've heard it before. We've got some people coming in, and I think it'll be interesting to hear their perspectives. Thank you for your time.
All right, well, thank you for your opening. See if we have some questions from the committee for you. Questions for Senator Kavanaugh? All right, will you stick around for close?
I will, yes.
Okay,
Thank
thank you. All right, so we're going to start with proponents to LR4CA. Come on up. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Brewer and members of the Government, Military, and Veteran Affairs Committee. My name is Jasmine Harris, JASMINE HARRIS. I am the Director of Public Policy and Advocacy for RISE, and I request that this testimony be included as part of the public hearing record that shows RISE is in support of LR4CA. RISE is the largest nonprofit organization in Nebraska focused solely on habilitative programming in prisons and reentry support. And our overall mission is to break generational cycles of incarceration. Taking the right to vote away from people with felony convictions is a practice that began in the late 1700s to early 1800s. The very fabric of our country was built on the democratic process, the participation of its members to determine its course. A U.S. citizen can lose their citizenship by committing one of 7 expatriating acts. The only one of these acts that is considered breaking the law and results in conviction is treason or participation to overthrow the U.S. government. There are no other convictions stated that would require someone to lose their citizenship. The number one criteria for being able to vote is being a U.S. citizen, and depending on the location and election, this doesn't even have to be a criteria. Therefore, a fundamental basic right of voting should not be taken away. Since the last time this piece of legislation was introduced, Washington, D.C. has joined the ranks of Maine and Vermont that do not take the right to vote away from anyone who is incarcerated, which includes those serving sentences for felony convictions. In Nebraska, individuals who are arrested and or awaiting trial for a felony or misdemeanor, whether in jail or out on bail, still have their right to vote. Along with times changing, our policies should change when we have found that they do not support the original arguments used to put them in place. What we know is that the original reason for the stripping of voting rights in Nebraska has roots embedded in racism. Thank you to this committee for voting LB 20, which Senator Wayne brought out, which would remove the 2-year waiting period to restore voting rights for people who have finished their felony sentence, including any parole or probation, onto general file. That bill will not address the many people who never step foot into prison, but have a felony probation sentence. This legislative resolution will. If this legislative resolution makes it to become a ballot initiative, the caveat is that these individuals wouldn't be able to vote for the constitutional amendment. We stand in the gap for them. And for these reasons, RISE supports LR4CA and asks the committee members to vote this resolution out of committee to general file. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your testimony. See if we have some questions for you. Any questions? Yes, Senator Ribble.
Thank you, Ms. Harris, for coming. Could you repeat again the federal language that would strike your citizenship again? What are the?
There are 7 expatriating acts.
Okay.
I don't remember them all by heart, but a lot of them, they're voluntary. So like if you join the army of another country, if you become a citizen of another country, treason is the only one that is breaking the law, that is those 7 expatriating acts.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you for the testimony.
Thank you.
Okay, next proponent. Welcome back to the Government Committee.
Chairman Brewer, members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Gavin Geiss, that is spelled Gavingeis. I'm the Executive Director for Common Cause Nebraska. Common Cause Nebraska supports LR4CA because we believe a representative democracy should work for and listen to every member of our society, including those currently serving a criminal sentence. For our democratic process to properly respond to the people's needs, it requires voters from a wide variety of backgrounds. When communities are underrepresented at the ballot box, the issues they face are underrepresented as well. Nowhere is this truer than our criminal justice system, which has long cut felons out of the voting process and is experiencing a period of crisis in Nebraska. Prison issues are felt most acutely by the prisoners who inhabit them, and by disenfranchising felons, the issues that affect them, like prison overcrowding, go unaddressed for too long. Beyond the harm disenfranchisement does to our democratic process, it also fails to be an effective deterrent and can do more harm than good in preventing recidivism. As a punishment, disenfranchisement doesn't work to deter crime any more than a criminal sentence does. People who are undeterred by a prison sentence are unlikely to be convinced by the threat of losing their voting rights. Additionally, the loss of voting rights disconnects felons from their communities and pushes them further towards the edges of our society. Instead, voting connects felons to their communities and can aid in their reentry upon release. The right to vote is at the heart of American democracy, even as we have struggled to extend that right to everyone. Over the past 200 years, we've worked to expand the franchise, first to non-property owners, then Black men, women, Native Americans, and finally Asian Americans. LR4CA gives that right the greatest protection and ensures that it isn't lost for any reason other than a betrayal of our nation. If we truly believe voting is vital to democracy and to being a citizen, it should be a right lost in only the most dire of circumstances. People in prison retain their citizenship, and we expect that having served their time, they'll return to the communities as productive members of society. But while calling on them to be good citizens, our system generally denies or erects barriers to exercising their right to vote. Removing felonies from the list of crimes that disqualify a voter, LR4CA, would restore the voting rights of those currently serving time for felony convictions and prevent the use of disenfranchisement for anything other than treason. This would help ensure that the interests of prisoners aren't overlooked and that they maintain their connection to the outside world while incarcerated. We urge you to give the right to vote the greatest protection and move this legislation to the floor for full discussion by the body. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. Let's see if we have questions. Questions for Gavin? Questions? All right, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, still on proponents to LR4CA. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Good afternoon, members of the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. My name is Jaden Perkins, Jadenperkins, and I'm here representing the Heartland Workers Center. At Heartland Workers Center, we do everything we can to increase voter accessibility wherever we can. And we're here to express our strong support for LR4CA, a constitutional amendment that aims to ensure that Nebraskans never lose their right to vote, even while incarcerated. Let's take a look at why our current constitutional statute on this issue is historically racist. In 1787, the Constitution considered Black people as 3/5 of a human being. Before the Civil War, according to the Brennan Center for Justice, voting rights and the loss of these rights were not linked to convictions, and America did not incarcerate in large numbers, and states that adopted broad felony disenfranchisement did so after establishing full white male suffrage by eliminating property tests. After the Civil War, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments came along. Birthright citizenship was established for exclusively freed enslaved people. Black men were granted the right to vote, and 2,000 Black men were elected to state and federal offices. Soon after, America responded. The exception in the 13th Amendment allowing slavery as a punishment for a crime was paired with the Black Codes, which basically criminalized Black life. Then America continued to fill its monstrous prison system with Black people for decades to come. What is the result of this history? Black Americans of voting age are more than 4 times as likely to lose their voting rights than the rest of the adult population. 1 of every 13 Black adults is disenfranchised. In some states like Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and until recently in Florida, 1 in 5 Black people have been disenfranchised from the ballot box. This means that in total, 2.2 million Black citizens have been banned from voting due to this policy. And 38% of that disenfranchised population in America is Black. LR4CA is a common sense proposal that will amend the state constitution to enshrine the right to vote to many system impacted Nebraskans, making our state a bright beacon for voter accessibility. It's time to right this historical wrong and let the people of Nebraska decide this issue at the ballot box once and for all. I urge you all to move this resolution out of committee and onto general file. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, questions? Questions? All right, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Government Committee.
Hello, Chairman Brewer and committee members. My name is Heidi Ewing, Heidiuhing, and I'm the Public Policy Director for Civic Nebraska. I'll be speaking in support of LR4CA. This constitutional amendment is similar to LB 20, a bill you heard from Senator Wayne to remove the current 2-year waiting period before former felons are eligible to re-register to vote. We threw our support behind that bill as we believe it to be more likely to garner support. But in principle, we support expanded voting rights, and there is precedent for this policy. In the District of Columbia, Maine, and Vermont, felons never lose their right to vote, even while they are incarcerated. In Nebraska, this bill would re-enfranchise the 5,300 people serving felony sentences, the 1,100 on parole, 4,000 on felony probation, and the 370 people in jail who currently are unable to vote, totaling nearly 11,000 Nebraskans. Just last Friday, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz signed a bill to restore voting rights to thousands of convicted felons in his state once they leave prison, instead of after completing parole. That law will go into effect July 1st and will allow as many as 55,000 formerly incarcerated felons to vote. I'd like to take the opportunity to note that if the state were to reinstate voting rights for those having served felony sentences, it should be obligated to also inform the public of this important change to our elections. The statewide public awareness campaign proposed by Senator Slama's LB 535 seems like a great opportunity for cost savings to have that campaign about new voter ID procedures include information about how former felons are now eligible to vote.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Questions for Heidi? Questions? All right, that's a great testimony. Okay, next proponent. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you. I'm Sherry St. Clair, SHERISTCLAIR, testifying on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Nebraska. The right of every citizen to vote has been a basic principle of the League of Women Voters since its founding. The League has undertaken nationwide efforts to promote voter protection and education and prevent the development of processes and laws that threaten to disenfranchise voters. Consistent with that position, the League is a proponent of LR4CA. According to the Sentencing Project report titled Locked Out 2022, an estimate of people denied voting rights, it estimates that nationally 4.6 million Americans, roughly 2% of the voting age population, will be ineligible to vote due to laws or policies, many of which date back to the post-Reconstruction era. In Nebraska, the report estimated that almost 18,000 citizens are in prison, jail, or on probation and are not allowed to vote due to a felony conviction. Based on the eligible voters in Nebraska, that means 5.5% of Nebraskans are disenfranchised and cannot vote compared to the national average of 2%. So we urge you to vote LR4CA out of committee into the general file for debate. This proposed amendment would allow voters to decide whether felony conviction other than for treason would take away the basic right to vote.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, questions for Sherry? Questions. All right, thank you for your testimony. Okay, still on proponents to LR4CA. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Brewer and members of the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. My name is Olivia Larson, OLIVIA LARSON. I am here as a representative of the Voting Rights Restoration Coalition and would like my testimony to be included in the official record. We are in support of LR4CA. As part of my position as a policy fellow working with people involved in the criminal justice system, I have met with many people whom LR4CA would positively impact. Currently, there are only 2 states, Maine and Vermont, as well as the municipalities of DC and Puerto Rico, that allow people in prisons to vote. This is known as the gold standard among voting rights advocates. Many states have taken steps towards this goal, including allowing people to vote as soon as they are released from incarceration. Nebraska is one of a few states that rescinds the right to vote from individuals even after their sentence has been completed. As I've previously testified, there's an arbitrary 2-year waiting period imposed in order for people to be eligible to vote once more. As such, Nebraska remains one of the most extreme states in terms of penalties for those with felony convictions to access their voting rights. With the passage of LR4CA, our state would become a champion of voting rights for people incarcerated. The revocation of voting rights is a penalty without a purpose. The Voting Rights Restoration Coalition believes the best people to advocate for changes to the criminal justice system are those directly involved in that system. People who have been incarcerated have families and issues they care about. The unavoidable fact is that individuals in prison will still be affected by policies passed in the state. They simply will not be able to vote on them. Voting is one of many pro-social behaviors linked to reducing crime and increasing public safety. It gives people a stake in their community, something people while incarcerated are isolated from. A concern heard very often among justice-impacted people is the inability to have a say in the issues that they face. Many of these individuals believe that once incarcerated, they're unable to vote ever again. As our current laws stand is confusing and apply different wait times to individuals once they're in their community based on parole, probation, and the 2-year waiting period, LR4CA would remove this confusion as individuals would never lose their right to vote and allow individuals to maintain civic engagement. For these reasons, the Voting Rights Restoration Coalition supports LR4CA. We thank Senator Kavanaugh for introducing it, and we ask the committee to vote yes and advance this bill out of committee. Thank you.
All right, thank you for testimony. Questions? All right, thank you for your testimony. Okay, still on proponents to LR4CA. Welcome to the government committee.
Hey guys. So sorry, I'm gonna read off my phone because I don't have access to a printer. All right, so. Chairman Senator Brewer and fellow members of the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. Greetings, my name is Michelle Lavon, filing MICHELLE LAVAUGHNE -FEILING. I rise today in support of LR4CA, the proposed constitutional amendment that would remove the disqualification of felons in the great state of Nebraska from being able to vote. I've spoke before this committee before in regards to other voting rights bills for persons convicted of felonies here in Nebraska. I truly believe in a simple right that so many millions of Americans enjoy, which is the right to vote. A criminal background should never be the reason to disqualify one from voting in local, state, and federal elections. I am an individual on federal probation, having been in federal prison for 9 years and 6 months. And let me be honest, I have 3 felonies in myself. However, my last felony was in 2011. I was released from the Federal Bureau of Prisons on October 29, 2020. I had some severe struggles when I released. However, I have to share my personal story of success since getting out and how being civically engaged has helped and encouraged me to stay on the right track, on the right path, and the right track of life. I'm 36 years old, trans woman who is going through my personal and sometimes very difficult journey to affirm my gender. I am extremely active in all aspects of society. I'm a member of Metropolitan Community Church of Omaha and very active in the church. I am a veteran of the United States Army, having spent 5 years as a food service specialist in 92 Gulf. I conquered the way of life of addiction, finally taking charge and going into what I had always dismissed, residential drug and alcohol treatment with the Department of Veterans Affairs for almost 9 weeks in Grand Island, Nebraska, at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center there. I came out of treatment and utilized the fact that I was told to live in sober living at Michael House in Omaha, Nebraska as a positive experience, and I am now exploring my own place in Omaha where I can live to continue on my positive path in life. I'm a frequent member and attendee of Turning It Over, a Zoom-based Alcoholics Anonymous meeting that meets at 3 different times, 7 days a week. I also from time to time join a Good Narcotics Anonymous meeting. Also for the last year, I managed to build professional success, first starting at a logistics company called the United Parcel Service, and then I discovered an opportunity at Amazon at the newest Amazon Fulfillment Center in Sarpy County, Nebraska. And let me just say this, what you hear on the news in regards to the negativity around Amazon is not true. Indeed, for me personally, I work a great 6-day-a-week schedule, working 10 to 12 hours overnights. I'm also a learning ambassador, and I train and retrain and coach new and current associates, as well as recently applied to be a process assistant and work for operations at the Fulfillment Center. I also am blessed to be married to a wonderful and amazing husband, Malik Baji, who is now waiting for his newly applied visas to come through so he can continue to teach here in Nebraska. He is a civics and history teacher, having taught in the Gambia and West Africa for 8 years. He even told me he was honored to have gotten the honor of the best teacher in Eastern region of Gambia. Also, in case you want to know, he wants to come to raise a family with me. I'm very much civically engaged, working with nonprofits of all kinds of backgrounds, from Civic Nebraska, RISE, and the Nebraska chapter of the Nebraska Poor People's Campaign. I have to say, being civically engaged has decreased my desire to ever want to relive a life of criminal activity of any kind, form, or level. I'm currently also in therapy for mental health, gender dysphoria, and trauma I've encountered in my life, from being molested as a child and raped 3 times as an adult to dealing with family dysfunction when I was younger. And it has been a lot for me. However,
Go ahead, finish.
Okay, however, the purpose of this hearing is to hopefully let me as a felon and many others who are felons in the state be able to vote. And you will only increase our desire to be productive members of society if you allow that to occur. A simple vote that many take for granted I would cherish. I would carry the privilege with great honor to voice my opinion or opinions at the ballot box with great pride. There are indeed states within this country, both Democratically and Republican-led, that allow felons to vote. Also DC, where I was sentenced out of. It's not something that is not societally wrong to allow a felon to vote. Perhaps there is fear from politicians that if you allow felons to vote, you might not get reelected. Where elections are based on the policies you present to get elected. So if you don't get elected or reelected, then it just simply means you don't have policy ideas that resonate. Also, being from the military and having a father retired from the United States Army after 20 years of service, who is very clear cut about a person who commits crimes and is a Republican, made the comment, I don't get it. You did your time. I don't get why you can't vote. And my husband doesn't understand it at all. Indeed, he says it is a form of suppression for me and others like me. Is it too far-fetched to give felons in Nebraska the right to vote? No, it's not too far-fetched. Indeed, you might not have some additional reoffenders. Might indeed help reduce the prison population. We all know that the state prison system is buckling, and building additional prisons is not going to help the situation. And so I ask you to pardon that personal thought. I hope you consider giving felons the right to vote. It's 2023, not March 1st, 1867, when Nebraska became a state. And we definitely, I don't think like the past political figures in this state.
Thank you. See if we have any questions. Questions? All right. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Okay, still on proponents. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Good afternoon, Government Committee. My name is Arlo Huddle. That's spelled ARLOHETTLE, and I'm the Grassroots Advocacy Coordinator with Nebraska Civic Engagement Table. We serve around 70 nonprofit members statewide, working to increase voter turnout and build a more engaged Nebraska. And we're here today in support of LR4CA because the table believes that the right to vote should never be taken away. Felony disenfranchisement does nothing to improve our criminal justice system or prevent recidivism, but instead it creates a barrier that discourages voting and other forms of civic participation upon release. There are a variety of reasons that voting rights restoration would be beneficial. For one, voting is a civically healthy behavior that promotes reintegration into a community. And while prisoners are physically removed from their community, voting provides a way for them to retain stakes in its well-being and participate from afar, decisions that will benefit them, their families, and their neighborhood. We want to see every citizen be a voter, helping to make decisions that would shape a better future for them and their community. And there's no need to exclude felons from this process. We encourage you to vote LR4CA out of committee and give the voters of Nebraska the ability to make Nebraska a state that never takes away a citizen's right to vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see if we get any questions. Questions. All right. Thank you for your testimony. Okay. Any additional proponents? Yeah, and we'll move to opponents to LR4CA. And is there anybody here then in neutral for LR4CA? All right. We'll ask Senator Cavanaugh to come on back and close.
Any letters for the record?
Thank you. That was a great prompt to remind me. Okay, proponents, 16 opponents, 43, and neutral, we had 1. With that, now, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee members, for taking the time to be here today and listen to why reinstating voting rights is so important. This is nothing about taking voting rights away will impact decision-making when it comes to whether or not somebody is committing a crime. This is not something that they take into consideration. And so taking away this right doesn't really factor in, and it's a punishment that has no correlation. And so I hope that we can remove that from our Constitution and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see if we have any questions. All right, thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you. Have a
thanks
great
for
day.
Reminding me on the letters.
Yes.
Appreciate the help. Okay, we'll have a slight pause while we switch out our bill numbers. Okay. And we will welcome our very own John Lowe to testify our seat. Senator Lowe, welcome to your government committee.
Thank you, Chairman Brewer and members of the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. My name is John Lowe, that's JOHN-LOWE, and I represent District 37, which is Kearney, Gibbon, and Shelton. LB 51 would make public power elections in Nebraska partisan. Electricity is the lifeblood of every business, school, home, farm, and our communities. Our electricity is produced and supplied by public power. Therefore, public power boards are some of the most important governing bodies in Nebraska. With these governing bodies being so important, I believe it is critical that voters have a clear understanding of who they are voting for. In reality, there are two great ways to do this. One is to run a campaign by knocking on every door in your area. Phone calls and text messages, and also direct mail. Traditionally, public power races just have not done this, at least until recently. We are now seeing an influx of huge money being spent by a few groups. All of a sudden, hundreds of thousands of dollars are being dropped into public power elections each election cycle. And each time and every time, these donations go to individuals of the same political mindset. For example, the Nebraska Conservation Voters Political Action Committee received $475,000 from Washington, D.C. to get involved in elections here in Nebraska in 2022. In the R+42 district that I happen to live in, one candidate received $99,460 from this group to try to get them elected. These are elections that used to cost maybe up to $1,000 to run. A couple sheets of plywood, your name along a couple popular streets, and you got your name out there. In 2020, $500,000 was received by Nebraskans for Common Ground, another group looking to influence Nebraska political power races. While I applaud these individuals and groups for supporting renewable energy, a small change in state law would level the playing field in these races. Allowing for public power elections to be partisan would remove the advantage that these out-of-state special interests have created for themselves by giving Nebraskans a clear choice. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I have a testifier behind me that has had experience in this. It just seems like people aren't well educated on a lot of political races, as we found. We would all like them to be well educated. We would all like them to have knowledge, but we've all gotten the flyers that have come in against us or for us that weren't from us as we campaigned. So we would just like to make it clear to the voter on where a candidate stands. Thank you. With that, I'll take any questions.
All right, thank you, Senator. And just to double check on your intro, you said this is LB
541.
Got it. All right.
What did I say?
You may have said 51, but it's all right. We got you covered here.
All right.
All right. Questions for Senator Lowe? Senator Conrad.
Thank you so much, Senator Lowe. Good to see you as always.
It's good to be here.
It's good to be here. It's good to be together and debating these important issues. And I think that there's probably a great deal of dissatisfaction across the political spectrum with big money or dark money in our politics and what that means for both process and result. For me, it's it's hard to figure out what the, bless you, Senator Halloran, what the right solution might be to addressing that. You know, I know campaign finance reform is one solution that's been looked at. Of course, you know, that brings with it a lot of concerns around free speech, of course. But your solution that I'm looking at here is just to ensure that we have partisan labels for some of these other offices that are available. Is that a fair
Basically,
assessment?
when you look at the ballot, it says RD, marijuana party, whatever, behind the person's name, so you know kind of how they stand.
Okay.
It's not always the case, but it's a little bit clearer choice.
Yes, that very good. And that was exactly my next question, because I know, for example, you know, on issues related to public power and conservation, that I don't think those values necessarily fit within one political party, so to speak. I think that they've, you know, in my experience in Nebraska, always been something that Republicans, Democrats, independents alike feel a lot of pride in our public power system and structure. I think there's a lot of consensus across the political spectrum when it comes to things like conservation policy. So I was just trying to kind of figure out how your solution may be helpful to voters on those position pieces, or perhaps cloud some of that common ground that exists. But I was just trying to get an understanding about the different solutions that are before us, and I appreciate you bringing the bill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any additional questions, Senator Holler?
Thank you, Chairman Brewer. Thank you, Senator Lowe. So it's fairly common for the parties to have what is commonly called a platform, and respectively, individuals that subscribe to whatever party it is are generally pretty familiar with their platform. Would you say that's the case?
Generally, yes.
Yeah. So what you're trying to do is to help the voters understand on these races generally what party they're with the understanding that they may have likely have an understanding of the platform and can relate to those principles in regard to the candidate.
Exactly. Would you like more than one?
No,
one
that's,
word?
that's a perfect answer.
Okay. Okay, any additional questions? All right, you'll stick around for close? Yeah.
Okay.
Has no
You'll
choice.
reserve the right.
Okay, we will start for proponents for LB 541. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you. Chairman Brewer, members of the committee. My name is Derek Rusher, DEREKRUSHER. I'm representing myself. Thanks for allowing me to testify today. I was an educator for 15 years before becoming the president and CEO of the Kearney Area Chamber of Commerce in January of 2018. I've grown to love public service, and in March of 2022, I decided to run for the board of the Nebraska Public Power District. In the last year, we've seen a variety of techniques employed to undermine the will of voters expressed through campaigns, and my campaign was unfortunately no different. I was warned about how there was smear campaigns against my predecessor a couple years prior to my election, and he was a former mayor, UNK grad, a well-respected gentleman in Kearney, Nebraska, and he was smeared in 2016 by my same opponent because of outside money and lies. Even with this information, I vowed to run a clean campaign moving forward. My dad's motto, do right. It guides me in my primary focus to represent the Kearney in the right way. Back to this year's election, based on the public accountability and disclosure statements filed by my opponent, her contributions were 100% from registered Democrats or left-leaning organizations. Because of my subdivision is mainly Republican, in order to win, my opponent portrayed herself more conservatively. Her last campaign flyer that was sent to flyers had her name across the top, and I quote, "is the only proven conservative candidate for the MPPD." And across the bottom, I quote, "vote conservative." And the most contradictory phrase, I quote, "fighting the far left radicals." I guess fighting the exact people of organizations that financially supported her campaign. This might not sound unusual to you, but for a rookie campaigner in the world that's trying to instill the do right motto in my 5 children, it was appalling to me. If the dishonest campaign doesn't raise concerns, the campaign finances should. I was able to raise about $25,000 for my campaign, way more than I ever thought I would have to. I had almost 60 unique donors, 100% of them being from the state of Nebraska. My opponent during her campaign rate was given over $103,000 from about 6 donors that I can find publicly. She received 3 individual contributions from registered Democrats. She also received $2,000 from NextEra Energy Resources, $1,000 from Nebraska New Energy, and $99,460 from Conservation PAC. 100% of her contributions were registered Democrats or left-leaning advocacy groups, but all of her campaign material was very conservative and screamed Republican. The bottom line, because public power elections are nonpartisan, they promote dishonesty. Voters deserve transparency instead of fraudulent and misleading campaigns funded by outside money. With little to no media coverage of local elections, voters may have very little sense of what candidates stand for. At least if they have an R or D after their names, voters will have a clue about whether their overall systems mesh with their own, even if they don't know their specific platforms. In the absence of a party ballot, voters will turn whatever queue is available, which often turns out to be a hot button item. My opponent campaigned on job creation and property tax relief during her MPPD campaign the previous cycle. I believe we would continue to keep public power elections nonpartisan and allow outside money to come into our great state. We will only have representatives of the upper socioeconomic status representing Nebraska. I ask you, do we want to elect officials that are bought, dishonest, and represent the views of outside money? Or do we want to produce elected officials that will represent their constituents who are friendly, honest, hardworking Nebraskans? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's see if we got some questions for you. Questions? Questions? Arlo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like your dad's motto. It's a pretty good one for your kids to learn.
Yes, sir.
And they did have an unfortunate example of learning through your election process. So you lost the race.
No, sir.
You did win the race in spite of all that.
Yeah, I knocked on about over 2,500 doors. It was a family affair. My children, my 5 children helped in my campaign, and we did it together.
So good old-fashioned door knocking.
Good old-fashioned, honest door knocking.
Okay. So that's what you had to combat a lot of outside money with, was just shoe leather and door knocking and getting to know your voters.
Yeah, I would say that was exhausting, especially when I would knock on a door that my opponent had knocked on, whether it was her or a paid person. I would receive the comment multiple times, oh, I thought she was a Republican. Oh, I thought she was the conservative candidate. And I was the only registered Republican candidate in the race.
So what you're looking for is, and it's an overused term, we use it a lot here. I understand that, but it doesn't belittle the importance of it, but it's transparency to the voter in regard to who they're voting for.
Yeah, I think transparency would be great. I would love to see more integrity in elections. I'm sure all of us would love that. What we saw over the past year was ugly, even in my own party. But yeah, transparency I think would be huge. I think it would be very valuable for the voters to just understand that platform, because public power is not a high profile race. My list at the Chamber of Commerce, it's in the bottom right corner. It's the last one of all of our elected officials, how we track them. And unfortunately, people just don't know a lot about it. So I believe that this would solve a lot of those problems. And I have a lot of peers now on the board and that have been part of the MPPD board that have similar experiences.
Well, thanks for testifying today. That's been good to hear from you.
Yeah.
Okay, just so for the record then, you're currently on the NPPD board?
I am correct, but I'm representing myself.
Right, okay. I'm saying, but the election that you won was for the NPPD board.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other questions? All right, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right. Any additional proponents for LB 541? Come on up. welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you, Senator Brewer and other senators on the committee. My name is Steve Davies, Stevedavies, and I testify in support of this bill. Partisanship is a big part of our political life. And as the previous testifier displayed, the nonpartisanship does bring in risks that we can't see. And just that partisan label gives voters some indication about a candidate that they wouldn't otherwise have. And you can see the results that it could have happened in his race. So I urge the passage of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Let's see if we got any questions. Questions? All right. Thank you for your testimony. All right, we are still on any proponents to LB 541. Connie, welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you. Connie Reinke, ConnieReinke. I am a proponent of this bill. I do believe that there should be the party listed on the ballot. I believe that this is really important. And there are so many other things that are so important. I'd like to read some information on source code and how that might apply to this issue. What is source code? Source code is the human readable representation of instructions that control the operation of a computer. Computers are composed of hardware, the physical devices themselves, and software, which controls the operation of the hardware. The software instructs the computer how to operate. Without software, the computer is useless. Source code is the human readable form in which the software is written by computer programmers. Source code is usually written in programming language that is arcane to and incomprehensible to non-specialists, but to a computer programmer, the source code is the master blueprint that reveals and determines how the machine will behave. Source code could be compared to a recipe, just like a cook follows the instructions in a recipe step by step. So a computer executes the sequence of instructions found in the software source code. This is a reasonable analogy, but it's also imperfect. While a good cook will use her discretion and common sense in following the recipe, a computer follows the instructions in the source code and mechanically and unfailingly, literally, while errors in a recipe might be noticed and corrected by the cook, errors in the source code can be disastrous. Because the code is executed by the computer exactly as it's written, whether that was what the programmer intended or not. Also, the computer software is vastly more complex than most recipes. What source code has to do with elections. Over the past several decades, we have automated more and more of the election operations. Elections have become increasingly reliant upon computing technology. The source code in voting machines and in some ways to the procedures provided to the election workers. Procedures are instructions that are to be provided to people. Who writes the election software? Now companies have voting equipment vendors creating this source code. Okay.
You can finish up if it's not too long.
Okay. We have asked in the counties for this source code for our election system and have not received it. So it's very hard to trust our elections, the individuals that are elected. Most states do not receive or require access to the source code. However, there are some exceptions, and it's listed down on the sheet: Florida, New York, Texas, Utah. There are others that require the vendor to provide source code to the actual parties, political parties. And so I just wanted to give that information today.
Okay, so there's two documents that you handed out. First one is Professor Clements. This reference Dodge County Commissioners. Your second one is by David Wagner. This is just general information that you talked about in your opening
Yes.
presentation.
It was mentioned in another committee meeting that someone wanted to understand what source code was. And so I wanted to make sure that you understood that clearly and have some information on that. As well as Professor Clemens came from New Mexico. He's an attorney that has been very involved in elections. And there are two things that would help us make sure that our elections are secure. And one of those is source code, the coding of how the ballots, how the names on the ballots were read by the computers. And the other thing is the cast vote record. And so even putting this partisan information on it, I support this bill, but we have so many important election issues to look at as well. So I wanted to bring that to your attention.
All right, thank you for this documentation. Questions for Connie? Questions? All right, thank you for your time, for your testimony. All right, still looking at proponents to LB 541. Seeing none, we'll go to opponents to LB 541. Okay, and if you're here as an opponent, go ahead and move forward so we kind of get a head count on all we got to go here. All right, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is James Dukesher, James Dukesher. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Nebraska Rural Electric Association. The NREA represents 34 rural public power districts and electric cooperatives throughout the state. We're here today in opposition to LB 541. We'd like to break our opposition to the bill into two separate issues. First, on the issue of requiring a PPD to hold a primary election. And second, we'll comment on the issue of party identification for candidates running for rural public power district boards. First, state law uses districts grossing less than $40 million in revenue to delineate between large and small public power districts. LB 541 eliminates this distinction in this section of statute. The power districts grossing less than $40 million in revenue are rural PPDs. They do not own large generation, they're distribution utilities. In the rural areas that these power districts serve, we're not seeing a flood of candidates that are seeking to serve on these boards. In fact, it's often difficult to replace a retiring board member. These races do not draw the political attention that the large public power districts may attract, nor do they attract some of the campaign expenses that we may see in the larger power district seats. Often on down ballot races, candidates don't make a decision to run a year in advance of the general election. Requiring a primary election moves up the date to file for these board seats. Currently, non-incumbents can file to run on a PPD board up until August 1st of the election year. LB 541 would move that date back to March 1st. Not only would that put a burden on the candidates to file, it would also put an additional financial burden on the PPDs to pay for the two elections with no added benefit. It's also important to note that the power districts may have the boundaries for their board seats set up in different ways. Some PPDs have at-large seats, some have districts, and some even have regions. I can envision a case where 2 Republicans run for 1 seat and no Democrats run. Then the election is decided in the primary. In this example, neither Democrats, independents, or those that did not vote in the low turnout primary have a say in who will represent them. Public power has a proud nonpartisan history. Most of the rural power districts I'm here to represent reside in one of the nation's most conservative congressional districts. There's no denying it that if polled, I would suspect that the vast majority of rural public power district board members belong to the Republican Party. With that said, our members are concerned with allowing the partisan element to enter into the selection of their board members and into their business operations. Rural electrification was born out of President Roosevelt's New Deal. Lyndon Johnson was a staunch supporter of the development of the REAs as he had seen their impact on rural Texas. Even our national organization, the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, has been run in recent years by both Republicans and Democrat CEOs who served in Congress. This bipartisan influence exists today, and we see it in the balanced discussions that my members have in their board meetings and at the committee meetings of my association. Everyone wants low-cost, reliable electricity, and the board members I represent don't have a lot of partisan issues facing them as they make board decisions. They just want to run a power district, a business. They want to keep the lights on and the rates low. It's for these reasons that we do not see the benefit the partisan election process would bring to the rural public power districts. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And if this was just public power in the big three, LES, OPPD, and NPPD, would that change how you come in on this?
I think that would be a completely different bill. It'd be a new conversation by our board, but yes, it'd be a whole new issue.
I kind of understand what you're saying, because the same thing up, if I went to Hay Springs, I believe that it is a bit of a struggle just to find folks to fill the seats that have the time to do it, because there are just so many taskers out there, especially if you're running a ranch or farm. All right, let's see if we got some questions for you. Questions. All right. Thank you for the testimony. Okay, now we're looking at opponents to LB 541. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Good afternoon, Senator Brewer, members of the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. My name is Al Davis, ALDAVIS, and I'm the registered lobbyist for the 3,000 members of the Nebraska chapter of the Sierra Club. And we're here today speaking in opposition to LB 541. LB 541 revokes the nonpartisan electoral process for our public power boards, making these positions subject to a variety of unintended consequences, which will result in electioneering in areas of public policy which have largely been exempt from that plague. The bill seems poorly constructed, leaving many unanswered questions. If my understanding of the statutes is correct, we are bringing many rural public power districts under election laws, which were exempt from certain procedures earlier because they fell below minimum cash receipts. And if I am correct, moving these positions to partisan ballots will require the election commissioners to add public power boards to the partisan ballots at the primary. Many of the rural public power districts targeted in this bill are districts where elections are dominated by Republicans. What that means, as James said earlier, is that the power district boards will be decided only by Republican voters in the primary, since these candidates will not be on the ballot for independent or Democratic voters, with only one Republican and one Democrat advancing to the November ballot. That's not democratic. Nebraska's public power industry has been working well for decades. The objective to provide inexpensive power to all Nebraskans has been achieved by this innovative model, which has largely been exempt from the vicissitudes of politics until recently. Public power is an area which should never be partisan, but should be guided by science, industry, and long-held statutory goals, and not by political gamesmanship. The last election cycle saw a massive amount of money employed against candidates for the public power boards by oil, coal, and gas industries whose objective is to elect individuals who are friendly to their business model. But the carbon-based industries are not Nebraska industries with Nebraska values. They are national and international businesses whose objective is to protect these shareholders from the reality that these industries are reaching the end of their relevance in driving the U.S. economy. LB 541 is a solution looking for a problem. One public power system is a national, our public power system is a national model for innovation, providing dependable energy at low rates to as many people as possible. Changing the model by promoting partisan politics, partisan national energy issues, and partisan loyalty will ossify the industry and amplify the voices of those with the most to lose by the transitions to new energy models. Please do not advance the bill to the floor. And just like to say one other thing, the what's it called here? the Nebraskans for Reliable and Affordable Electricity pumped a lot of money into this last election, supporting the candidate who spoke earlier, and he did defeat the person he was running against. So I don't think he has really much to complain about. Thank you.
All right, questions? Yes, Senator Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome. Glad you're here.
Thank you.
So in spite of all that, do you think there's not national energy issues that are being funded by interest outside of the state?
I think you have the industries on the right doing the same thing as the industries on the left, if you want to call it that. The green energy people are trying to steer policy the way they want it to go. The carbon-based industries are steering policy the way they want it to go. You see it here every day.
And you think it's pretty proportional?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if you look at the data, you'll see that most Nebraskans seem to support, going to a more green energy model. Most of the surveys I've ever seen have indicated it's pretty overwhelming in the percentage.
I'm very, very cynical, and this is just an opinion. I shouldn't state it, but I'm very cynical of polls and surveys because whoever creates the poll or survey, whatever bias they may have, and it can be on both sides, can create a survey or a poll that, by the nature of leading questions, can get the results they want.
Well, that's certainly true, Senator. I think, this was done by the university, so I have a lot of faith in the work they do.
I rest my case.
All right, any additional questions? All right, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, additional opponents to LB 541. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you, Senators. I'm Sherry St. Clair, SHERI-STCLAAR, testifying on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Nebraska as an opponent to LB 541. When the unicameral legislature was established in 1934, the intent was to shield Nebraska from the political forces of the national parties. Leadership is to be based on quality rather than political affiliation. The League supports electoral methods that encourage voter participation while maximizing the effectiveness of every vote. When voters are able to look at the qualifications and records of those running for office rather than their political party, more effective leaders and representation will emerge. This allows voters to vote for the candidate who aligns best with their individual beliefs rather than political affiliations that can fall prey to national interests that may not be in Nebraska's best interest. Like the unicameral, public power districts and public power and irrigation directors should be elected on a nonpartisan basis. Decisions made should be in the best interest of the citizenry, not the party. As a result, the League opposes LB 541 and recommends indefinite postponement.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Questions for sure.
Thank
you. Yes, Senator Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here.
Yes, Senator.
So a previous testifier, proponent, made some comments about their opponent that made some very misleading statements on their promotional material. And any side can do that. I understand that, but that misleading information, implying that they were conservative when they weren't, is clearly misleading the public, right? So having a partisan, you think that having a partisan R or D, and partisan's got a bad, the term partisan's got a bad rap. I'd almost rather we would refer in terms of registrant to Democrat Party, registrant to the Marijuana Party, or registrant to the Republican Party. Just informed. Do you think that wouldn't help inform the public generally about what their views are?
I think we should also look at the fact that there are increasing numbers of Nebraskans that consider themselves independent voters. And the R and the D certainly get at people that are willing to vote in a straight party line or don't do, in-depth research on the candidates, and it kind of ignores the independent voter. So, but in all fairness, you are correct that both sides, left, right, do slant issues, slant testimony, slant materials to their benefit. It's a lot of work for the voter.
Individually, right. But the parties do have clear definitions of whatever their platform is, be it conservative or liberal or whatever it might be. Doesn't that give the voters some kind of at least a litmus test about what that candidate leans
It
towards?
should, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any additional questions? Thanks, Sherry.
Thank you.
All right, we're still on opponents to LB 541. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Good afternoon, Chairman Brewer and members of the committee. My name is Mia Perales, Miaperales, and I am from Omaha Students for Sustainability. We are a multi-high school organization composed of students all over Nebraska, and we work to create sustainable solutions for our schools and communities and provide students with the resources they need to get involved. Even as a youth nonprofit, we are nonpartisan. This is because our greater goal of improving Omaha through the normalization of sustainability can only be complicated by partisanship. Public services also share the goal of improving community, so why not share the bipartisanship? In the United States, I'm sure you are all very familiar with the great issue that we face of the party versus party, or the great political divide. To me, it does not make sense why we would want to create more division, which is, I personally believe, that is what this bill will entail. Almost every politician runs on the basis of wanting to unite, but now Senator Lowe, it appears your goal is to create division. While the intent of efficiency is valid, overall, it does not seem this will be the outcome. So that is why I ask you to vote no on this bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Let's see if we have questions for you. Questions. All right, thank you for your testimony. Okay, next opponent to LB 541. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you. Honorable Senators Shirley Niemeyer, Shirley Niemeyer. And I oppose this bill. And I want to think about contemplating some points. And I'm thinking about, will the best candidate that is qualified win? Why is this being proposed? Will this mean that the predominant party in Nebraska will win almost every board position? I really like our nonpartisan elections, is because I have to look at their qualifications. And I do. I look them up on Facebook. I look them up here. I really try. It's hard, but I really try because I want the best qualified person there. And does money come from wealthy donors? Yes, it comes to the Republican Party. It comes to the Democratic Party. Not so much independent. I also want to think about what are we really talking about here? Because we are opposed to greening energy sources, we have a massive climate change. We need our public power entities to address that. For now, we have solar, we have wind. We're looking at other energy sources. We need to do that. We have to do that for our children. We have to do that for the young people. Climate change is real. And yes, you can look after poll, but they are consistently showing more Americans than ever believe climate change is real. And if you look at what's happening in Nebraska and to some of the Nebraska farmers, to the flooding, to the snow events, that should be a clue that it's really happening here. It's going to be very difficult for our agricultural communities and the sandhills. Very difficult. And so I think this is about a couple of people who don't like the direction of moving towards green energy. And we have to do the right thing. We have to look at the facts, not the platform, because honestly, I don't know what the platform is anymore for the Republicans, the Democrats, or the independents. I'd rather look at the person, and I vote across parties because I want the best person in there. And I have one example of what happened this last year. Oh my gosh, this candidate was good. Female, independent, had all these meetings, almost all the money was from Nebraska in small amounts. And out comes this massive postcard campaign about what she was doing with Hillary Clinton and what she was doing with Nancy Pelosi. What does that have to do with the State Board of Education? Nothing. It was bad. It was almost libelous. So I feel so bad about what's happening in politics, that money is buying elections. And I don't think that should happen. But the issue here is climate change. And I thank you very much for listening. You can tell I'm passionate about this because I want our children and our youth to be able to address these issues.
Okay, let's see if we have any questions. Questions, Senator Holler.
Thanks, Senator Brewer. Thanks for your testimony. What do you think about nuclear power?
I think that's a potential. I read Warren Buffett invested in some other countries in small nuclear reactors, not like the ones. Some of them are being put underground. They're much safer than what we're thinking of because I go, from the past. But they are safer. They are smaller, not for, a farm or something, but they are for communities, maybe 10, 20, 30,000 as I understand it. You'd have to look more into the research. But I think that's a good alternative. We can't go with one. We can't go with all solar, all wind, all nuclear. We have to combine them. We're still going to have some coal, some gas. But we also are looking at cellular and wave action. We have that. And there's some things with small plants and things in the ocean that create energy, and they're researching that. It is fascinating if you read some of the research on what can come, but we have to, in between, we have to go with what we have now that's less polluting. We've got to stop carbon pollution as much as possible. That's my answer.
So what do we do about the issue of if we become mostly reliable upon wind and solar?
The batteries in Australia are being researched, and they are 4 times more efficient.
And that brings up another issue. Most of them are lithium batteries, I would suppose.
Yes, and that is a toxic product. But they're using salt, ocean salt, and something else, and I can send you the information if you would like. But everything we do, I can step outdoors, and I will affect our environment.
Oh, stay inside.
Everything we do. It affects our environment. We have to do less.
Well, even breathing affects our environment.
It certainly does. We take in oxygen.
And we're emitting what?
Carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide.
Mm-hmm.
And as I recall, and this was just, a high school biology class, botany class, it was the relationship of plants taking in carbon dioxide, and we're all for a greener environment with more plants, right? They breathe in carbon dioxide. Is that your understanding?
Mm-hmm. And trees are also that possibility, but we're wiping out some of the Brazilian forest. We're taking out a lot of trees. I can see some of the windbreaks in the farm area being decimated. We've got to plant more, but I don't think they give off oxygen until they're growing about 8 or 10 years. They have to be growing quite a bit before they're able to do that in their system.
So I'm part of a new movement, Let the Trees Live.
Pardon?
I'm part of a new movement, Let the Trees Live.
Yeah, good for you.
And there is no such movement, I don't think. But
There isn't?
But
Well, Arbor Day Foundation has a great 1 million trees.
yeah, and that's great. My point is we're starving trees of carbon dioxide by shutting down carbon-based power plants, right?
We are also melting glaciers. We're also raising the ocean level. We're warming the ocean. It's changing the composition. The temperature, the birds are coming earlier. The seals along San Francisco have moved north because of the temperature change in the water. We could debate this for a long time.
Well, I'm getting,
And I think we've debated enough.
I'm getting looks from my fellow committee members.
Yeah, you are getting the look. All right. Any other questions? All right, thank you for your testimony.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a young man who's drove all the way from Alliance to meet me. I'm going to hand the gavel over, step out real quick. I'll be right back.
Any other opponents? Welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment today in opposition of LB 541. My name is Jennifer Glazer, it's Jennnifer Glazer, and I'm a resident of District 6 in Omaha. I volunteer for and represent a nonpartisan organization in which we value nonpartisanship in the management of energy systems. This organization represents 4 chapters across the state and over 1,800 members, again, across the whole state of Nebraska. Having a nonpartisan ballot really encourages people to more diligently seek information and become better informed about the candidates and assures that the best candidate is voted in. We need our boards to run on how they address the issue of energy, not based on their political party. We also don't want candidates to be limited by a party platform. I would also ask, what problem are you trying to address or fix with this bill? According to the Electric Utility Performance state-by-state review of the Citizens Utility Board, Nebraska utilities rank in the top 10 overall of the 51 states, including the District of Columbia. Nebraska is in the top 10 for affordability, top 5 for reliability, and this demonstrates that our system of governments is working well. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's check if there's any questions. Are there any questions? See none. Thank you for your testimony. Are there any other opponents? Welcome.
Thank you, Senator Sanders and committee, for this opportunity to testify today. My name is Kay Carne, Kaycarne. I'm a resident of District 13 in Omaha. Electricity is critical to our way of life. When the power is out, it's hard for our society to function. Schools are closed, businesses are disrupted, healthcare is disrupted, food spoils. We all know that when we lose power, we can't use our electronic devices. It's very disruptive. Nebraska utilities are succeeding. As the prior testifier said, we're ranked in the top 10 overall for affordability and reliability. And this system of governance is working well. Currently, we choose our board members on a nonpartisan ballot. This allows the 2 candidates the voters believe are best qualified for the position and who best represent each voter's personal views as they relate to public power to advance to the general election, regardless of party affiliation. When I ran for county assessor, I had to take a test to make sure I understood the duties of the job with enough precision that I could pass that test. The test proctors told me that day that about half of the people failed the test. This tells me that there's a process to weed out people without the expertise to serve as a county assessor. There's no test for those running for public power boards. The voters are the ones who need to weed out those who do not have the expertise to lead extremely complex, critical infrastructure businesses with annual revenue of over $1 billion a year, such as OPPD. This analysis is up to the voters. If each party only sends 1 candidate to the general election, Nebraska will not be getting a choice between the 2 most qualified individuals because certain parties are stronger in different areas of the state. For example, on a nonpartisan ballot, 2 Republicans will likely advance in many areas, and that will give voters a choice between the best 2 candidates in the general. Others have also commented that it would allow for Democrats and independents to vote on those 2 individuals who will represent them. I've seen public power elections with at least 6, maybe 8 candidates to start in the primary. If there's not a process to advance the two most viable candidates with the most expertise and the views the public desires, our public power utilities will suffer, and it will weaken our critical infrastructure. All of you are elected on nonpartisan ballots, and you likely appreciate the quality of state senators serving in this body. With nonpartisan elections, we get state senators who are extremely qualified and who work to know and represent their constituents well. This makes Nebraska unique, and it makes Nebraska strong. And this is the way we should continue to run our public power utility elections.
Thank you. Let's check to see if there are any questions. See none? Thank you
Thank
for your
you.
testimony. Are there any other opponents? Welcome.
Hello, Councilman. I'm Chloe Johnson, CHLOEJOHNSON. I am also a director from Omaha Students for Sustainability. And like we said, we are a nonpartisan student group. When we started looking at this bill, we were honestly quite confused because it just seems irrational for a time when many politicians are running on the basis of uniting and nonpartisanship to be introducing new partisanship to the government. It was especially confusing to us to why we would be adding partisanship to the public power districts, as this seems especially dangerous. Historically, Republicans have championed environmental and conservation issues. They've supported public parks. They've been a huge part of bringing recycling to much of the country. And unfortunately, now the Republican Party has somewhat taken a stance of anti-renewables, anti-clean energy, and being especially in some districts more than others, having heavy Republican political majority would erase the qualifications, and it would essentially just allow Republicans and the platform of anti-renewable to become the majority in these areas. And this actually led us down a little bit of a research rabbit hole, because we started thinking, well, why is this a partisan issue? Why are Republicans now, in opposed to past and historically, against renewables? And some reasons we came up with, and after talking to Republican relatives and politicians, they were worried about jobs, which is interesting in our state, as we do not have any fossil fuel resources here. We don't have a stake in the coal production. If they're worried about those type of jobs, coal jobs, which by the way, make up in this country less than the amount of employees that are at Arby's, is the amount of coal employees that we have in our nation. If they're worried about that, that is another state's issue, meaning that worry comes from a worry about lobbying and outside state money, which is what I believe this bill is against. And then the other big worry that we found rather irrelevant to our state was the worry about, I just finished my sentence.
Time is up, but go ahead and finish your sentence or paragraph.
Was our worry about instability in having renewables that are, run on these batteries sometimes, but actually what we're seeing happening, and at least I can only speak in Omaha, so we're transitioning to full clean energy by 2050, and we're doing that by building gas plants that are also running off of wind and solar. So they're moving, as the technology develops, we're moving more and more towards wind and solar, but they're both being built alongside natural gas plants. So we will never have a time where we are out of power because the wind is not blowing or something. So that is largely an invalid argument, meaning that the real reason that Republicans would want partisanship, that Republicans are even largely have taken a stance by fossil fuels, is because big national corporations and companies that fund Republican campaigns, and even state companies that fund Republican campaigns, are receiving money or directly are fossil fuel companies. Meaning that the purpose of this bill to help with the dark money issue, this is just perpetuating it.
Thank you for your testimony. Check to see if there are any questions. See none? Thank you for your testimony. Are there any other opponents? I see none. In the neutral? See none. We'll go ahead and close. Closing 541. Senator Lowe, while you make your way up here, we do have 57 proponents, 34 opponents, and 0 in the neutral.
Thank you, Vice Chair Sanders. I think a point was made during the discussion of the opponents. I believe it was Shirley Niemeyer that mentioned that this is all about green energy. And how do we buy elections to support green energy? And that's what's happened. The amount of money that's coming in to do that from out of state Nebraska, not in state Nebraska. Two groups that were funded by the Nebraska Conservation Voters DC money from Washington, DC, were the Nebraskans for Common Ground Pact in the 2021 cycle, and the Conservation Nebraska in this last cycle. Large amounts of money coming in. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to spend $100,000 in a $5,000 race? Is it to elect the best person? Or is it the one that wants to push your agenda? That's what we're looking at here. I appreciate the students coming in today to testify. But we do have carbon-based fuels that come out of Nebraska. Oil wells that line the Kansas-Nebraska border, they're there. All the way from south of Hastings to down by McCook, there are oil wells out in the Panhandle. So we do have carbon base. And prior to Mr. Rusher getting on the board, NPPD board, there was a vote for net carbon neutral by 2050. May put our reliable energy in jeopardy. I kind of like my refrigerator and my freezer because it is full of good Nebraska beef. I'd hate to see that power go out, waiting for the next 20-mile-an-hour wind to generate the power to put it back on. I want the best person, local person, to win that race with money that's based out of our local communities, not brought in from out of state. And so I don't want our elections being bought by large money. And to see $100,000 come into a race from out of state to support an agenda, I just don't believe is right. And that's why I brought LB 541, so that we here in Nebraska can decide our races. And so we don't have to run a $5,000 race by generating $60,000. You have a campaign of $100,000 or contribution of $100,000 coming into your campaign. You can afford people to go out and knock doors for you. You can afford an army of people to do that before the primary and before the general. Can't do that on $5,000. Can't do it on $10,000. So that's why I brought 541. We'll look at excluding the NREA so that they could come aboard with this. We'll see what we can do to do that and get them on our side. With that, I close 541.
All right, thank you. Let's see if we got any questions. Questions? I apologize for stepping out. I had an 8th grader who came all the way from Alliance. It's a long drive to not get to see your center when you come here, so I ducked out to see him, so I apologize for that. But
Was he driving on a school?
No, he has a teacher with him, so they're here testifying actually in another committee, but I didn't want to leave him hanging. He came too far to not be there.
And I'm glad we have the Lorax with us. Save the trees.
All right, let's see. Did we read in letters? All right, thank you. Thank you for testimonies. Let's take a second to reset. The next bill will be LB 764. And we will invite Senator Lippincott to the chair. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman Brewer and members of the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. I'm Senator Lauren Lippincott, Lauren, L-O-R-E-N. Lippincott is L-I-P-P-I-N-C-O-T-T, and I represent District Number 34 in the Nebraska Legislature. I'm here to introduce LB 764 to return Nebraska to the winner-take-all system for electing the President and Vice President of the United States. I'm sure everyone in the room is aware that only Nebraska and Maine split their electoral votes. LB 1206 was introduced in 1990 to end Nebraska's long practice of awarding our electoral votes by the winner-take-all system and changed to the congressional or district plan. LB 1206 did not advance, and it was reintroduced as LB 115 a year later in 1991. LB 115 did advance to general file and was debated at length. It passed with 25 minimum vote requirement on each round of voting, including final reading. It was signed into law by Governor Ben Nelson, and in 1992, Nebraska fell under the district plan. A year later, in 1993, 2 bills were introduced to return Nebraska to the winner-take-all system, with one of the bills advancing to general file. In 1995 and 1997, LB 65 and LB 103 were passed by the body, returning Nebraska to winner-take-all system. However, both were vetoed by then Governor Ben Nelson. Since that time, the Government Committee has sent similar legislation to the floor 6 times for full debate. In the year 2000, LB 1179, 2001, LB 454, in 2003, LB 2563, 2006, LB 864, and in 2014, LB 382, and finally in 2015, LB 10. The full legislature did not have the opportunity to debate the first 4 of the bills. LB 382 was bracketed by the introducer on general file, and LB 10 failed on a 32-17 cloture vote on final reading. Now, reading through past transcripts, there are a few running arguments against Nebraska returning to the winner-take-all system, and I would like to address those items. Argument number 1, the district plan, which we have now, is a compromise between winner-take-all and abolishing the electoral system. However, the district plan is still the electoral system, and it puts Nebraska at a disadvantage until we play by the same set of rules as the rest of the nation. Argument number 2, the district plan, which we have now, is a trend. No state has changed to the district plan in the past 32 years. Argument number 3, my vote doesn't count, or voters need to feel like their vote counts. Well, one of the best quotes from the LR 423 roundtable in 2010 on the issue was, quote, votes count as long as your vote is cast. And that was made by Vince Powers, who was, at the time, the Nebraska Democratic Party chairman. Another item is, how do you evaluate a feeling? Do they mean that they feel like their vote counts only if who they voted for wins? Argument number 4, this is an experiment worth trying. This is a policy decision. It's not an experiment. We have used the district plan for 32 years, and the experiment is over. Argument number 5, the district plan, what we have now, increases grassroots participation and encourages more people to vote. However, campaigning 101, it is the candidate and the campaign structure that drives volunteer support. And finally, argument number 6, in the 2010 committee hearing, it was mentioned that in passing LB 115, the hope was more presidential candidates would come to Nebraska. However, we're a small state with only 5 electoral votes, and we are no longer one of the few states to hold a primary. And when a presidential candidate does come to Nebraska, it's to Omaha generally, which is a high population center and across the river from Iowa. So no one state has adopted our congressional district plan that we have in place right now. And here's the crux of this whole bill. The district plan, what we have now, discourages candidates from addressing issues that appeal to the state as a whole by rewarding candidates who visit our congressional districts with higher population and income levels to the exclusion of rural Nebraska. The district plan also encourages third-party candidates to capture their share of electoral votes, increasing the likelihood that no one candidate receives the needed 270 votes required. This means that the U.S. House of Representatives would decide who is the next president of the United States. Next handout we're giving you, in researching the district plan, what we have now, it's interesting to note that if the entire country used the district plan, the 2012 election would have had a different outcome. You will see in the handout that Romney would have won the Electoral College with 277 votes to President Obama's 260 votes. Finally, my last point is Nebraska votes for our governor as a state that is winner take all. We vote for U.S. Senator and constitutional offices such as our Secretary of State, the Attorney General, the State Auditor, and our Treasurer as a whole state, which is winner take all. The best policy decision for Nebraska is to return to voting for President and Vice President of the United States as a whole state. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Let's see if we got any questions for you. Yes, Senator Hunt.
Thank you, Chairman Brewer. Good to see you in Government Committee, Senator Lippincott. Do you think it would be, how would you feel if every state did what Nebraska does?
Well, the handout that you have received, as we saw in the election in a few years ago, if all the states did as we do, Romney would have been the president. So again, my point here is that what we have right now, the person running for president would just go to the high population centers of the state and exclude, in our case, the western portion of Nebraska. And that would be true for all 50 states.
What you said, you were going through the different reasons of proponents and opponents in the past, and that was a really helpful list. I was struck by the point you made about how people talked about that this was an experiment. and it's a policy decision. It's not an experiment. And you said after 32 years, the experiment is over. Why do you think the experiment is over? What do you mean?
Well, for the reason I stated, again, the crux of the whole argument is what we have right now, the district plan, is actually a compilation of both the electoral college and also then by population. So in essence, and I'm sure you know this already, but just for the record, we've got 5 electoral votes. So 2 of them are for the senatorial, and that is statewide. And then the other 3 are by congressional district. So 3 plus 2 is 5. And so it's a compilation of both electoral college that we have now and then doing it by district. And I believe that Maine does it the same way. And they started back in 1972, so 30 years ago, before we did.
You also talked about, do you think it would be a bad thing if a third-party candidate got some electoral votes from Nebraska or from Maine?
Well, no, not necessarily. I think John Anderson and Ross Perot, some of the latest third-party candidates. But the point there is, if all the states had like what we have here, then it could prevent one person from getting 270 votes, electoral votes. And so your question is, would that be a bad thing? Is that it?
Yeah, my question is, why do you think that's a bad thing?
Well, elections are a marketplace of ideas. And right now we've got a 2-party system. Seems to work well.
Do you think that it should just stay 2 parties and perhaps third-party candidates shouldn't be running?
That argument is made repeatedly. It has some valid points to it.
People do make the argument. I'm saying, is that your argument?
Correct.
Okay.
Mhm.
And then finally, I don't think I have more, but why do you want this?
Well, the
In your words.
reason I just said,
Uh-huh.
I'm a rural guy, come from 100 miles west of here.
Is it because you want presidential candidates to come out there?
Well, the last time a presidential candidate came out to Grand Island was Jimmy Carter, just a few weeks after the first part of June in 1980, but that was because of a tornado went through Grand Island and ripped the city apart. So yeah, we want our voice to be heard out in rural Nebraska. And I believe that returning it back to what the other 48 states have would help that.
Do you think that passing LB 764 would result in more presidential candidates visiting Nebraska?
Perhaps.
Do you think that, though?
It's very possible.
Do you think that more candidates will be coming out to rural Nebraska under this bill?
It could very well.
Okay.
Actually, Ronald Reagan also came to Grand Island. I forgot about that.
Did you ever see any of the candidates that came to Nebraska?
I'm sorry.
Have you ever seen any presidential candidates in Nebraska personally?
Me personally? I have. Richard Nixon, when I was a kid.
And he came to Nebraska?
He did.
Where was that?
Omaha. I think it was in the Exarban Arena. I was just a kid.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, additional questions, Senator Rabel.
Thank you, Senator Lippincott. Can you tell us how many times since we have gone to the district plan that one of the districts did not go towards Republican candidates?
I think it's happened once. I'll probably rephrase your question in that if one district split off from the other districts in terms of who they elected as president. I believe that's happened one time with Nebraska, and that was also one time in Maine. So it is a rare entity,
Do you
rare
think
occurrence.
And like Senator Hunt, I'm trying to figure out, why is that a bad thing? I mean, how many states have a unicameral?
Yeah, personally, I don't know if this is so much a unicameral question.
But it's the uniqueness of who we are as Nebraskans. And I always think that we are somewhat unique, having a unicameral. We're one of two states that does do the presidential elections by district. So one of two. So that makes us
Yep.
pretty unique
Well-
and independent. I think Nebraskans are pretty darn independent minded and
It is, but again, that same logic then would say, why don't we do the Secretary of State that way? And all the other state offices in the same way. So that logic would be applied then to all those other races as well.
well, I know with the federal races for congressional districts, they are set up that way, which makes sense. Because they want to have that representation from that specific
Right.
congressional district.
But-
So
but
that
it-
makes sense.
That is correct. And that's a good thing.
Mhm.
But the president is over everybody in the state. The Secretary of State's over everybody in the state, along with Mike Hilgers, the Attorney General, and all the state offices.
And so I think when you reference the one case, I think that was probably in 2008 with the second congressional district going for President Obama. And, you know, what I hear a lot as a state senator that, you know, we want our rural voices heard, we want our rural voices heard. Well, I'm going to just spin it and say, you know, we want our urban voices heard too for certain candidates that more closely align with our Nebraska values. So I think there's good and bad, and it seems like the electoral college process that we have adopted in our state of Nebraska seems to work just fine.
Yeah, not to get into a contest here, but, you know, we've had this for 30-some years. There's some validity to what you say, but again, I go back to, why do we not do that with the other individuals? And why do the other 48 states then not come over to our way of doing things?
Well, they haven't come over to our way of doing a unicameral either, so I
That's
don't
true.
think that's necessarily a
true.
good or bad thing. That's who we are as Nebraskans, so I'm pretty proud of it.
Okay, additional questions, Senator Lowe.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Senator Lippincott, for bringing the bill. As I recall, the last campaign stop while they were running for office was probably out in western Nebraska, was probably Bobby Kennedy on a whistle stop as he went through on a train.
That is true.
But other than that, they don't count outside Lincoln and Omaha.
True.
So it's been a while. It's been a while. Thank you.
Yes, Senator Hunt.
Sorry, one more question occurred to me. You talked about how elections are, would you say elections are a marketplace of ideas? So there's nothing that would prevent every electoral vote in Nebraska from going to the same candidate, right? In fact, typically it does. I mean, typically all of the electoral votes go to the same candidate. And you talked about how candidates don't often come to more rural parts of the state. Is that not also part of the market? Is there anything that other congressional districts can do to perhaps market themselves to persuade more presidential candidates to come out there?
Well, that's a valid point. However, you know, in marketing, whether it's business, you go to numbers.
Go on.
So what we have right now is a candidate will go to the area that provides the most numbers.
The most populous part, you're saying?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Is this in any way Nebraska government affecting the market as it affects today for candidates in Nebraska? I'll let that thought form a little bit more. I'll be finished. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Additional questions? I was trying to look it up. It looks like the electoral college votes were split both in 2008 and 2020.
Yes. Yes, sir.
If my little research here was right. Okay, just double checking on that. All right, one more time. You'll stick around for close?
Yes, sir.
Good. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we will start with proponents. Mr. Secretary. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Bob Evnen, B-O-B-E-V-N-E-N. I have the honor and privilege of serving as Nebraska's Secretary of State. I'm here this afternoon in support of LB 764. I admire the historical background that Senator Lippincott has provided for this. Most recently, this proposal got all the way to final reading, where there was a filibuster and it lost by one vote. That was a rather odd thing. You don't see that very often, a filibuster on final reading. Nebraska, as Senator Lippincott indicated, was a winner-take-all state until 1991. The only other state that does this is Maine. We are not playing by the same rules as the other states in the union. And we ought to, because our failure to do so dilutes Nebraska's electoral college presence. And the idea that electoral college votes should be distributed by congressional district, if we did that nationally, what impact would that have? And the answer is the impact would be, it would guarantee massive gerrymandering. It's just not a good idea from a policy standpoint. So you recall, I'm sure, that there were complaints about the lines that were drawn between congressional districts 1 and 2 in Nebraska, and there was some complaints about whether those lines were fairly drawn. If you would like to see a picture of congressional districts, take a look at the congressional districts in the Chicago metropolitan area. The congressional districts in California were drawn in such a wildly bizarre way that a number of years ago, California voters actually put forward an initiative in which every single congressional district in the state was described inside the initiative in order to reform and the gerrymandering that had developed in the state of California. They succeeded in getting enough signatures to be able to put it on the ballot, and it succeeded overwhelmingly on the ballot. However, the California Supreme Court, in a decision that we could discuss at another time, ruled it unconstitutional under California's constitution. That sort of gerrymandering would be, this would be pikers compared to what would happen if electoral college votes were cast by congressional district. So it is, in my view, a bad policy, not to be adopted by the country, hasn't been, and we ought to end this in our state as well, and return to a winner-take-all system that we had for so long prior to this, and not play by rules that nobody else plays by, and not dilute our electoral college presence. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Let's run through questions. Senator Ripple.
Thank you, Secretary Evan. Could you go into it a little bit more? How does it dilute the electoral process in the state of Nebraska?
Because in the last election, the winning candidate in Nebraska won by 182,000 votes, but lost one of the electoral college votes. That dilutes our presence compared to everybody else who does this on a winner-take-all process. So the winner in a winner-take-all process lost an electoral college vote. That split dilutes the effectiveness of our votes.
I kind of find it difficult to follow along that reasoning when it seems in all but 2 of the presidential races in the last 30 years, we've had one of the district votes go towards the Democratic candidate. I don't see the logical reasoning in how it really diluted the effectiveness and results from the state of Nebraska when it's still 4 of the 5 went towards a presidential candidate.
Well, I guess, Senator, I could take that and turn that on its head and say, well, why not then? Because it almost always happens that way anyhow. So why don't we go back to winner take all? It sort of cuts the other way as well.
Yes, sir.
Yes, and so how likely do you think it is for the other 48 states to switch to our way of doing by districts? You know, I know the handout we received said that would have changed the election of 2012, but you know, we've been talking about this for 30 years. Can you imagine all the other states trying to talk about, hey, we want to change from winner take all to going by districts? It's sort of like a hypothetical that is highly unlikely to happen. So what are your thoughts about the other states going to the way that we do it in Nebraska?
Well, that was my discussion earlier, Senator, when I talked about massive guaranteed gerrymandering in order to affect presidential results.
So do you see that in our state of Nebraska, massive gerrymandering?
I see that there are other states that are more than willing to engage in gerrymandering to accomplish whatever ends the people who draw the lines are seeking. And I infer from that history that if the presidential election were at stake, we would see lots more of that.
Okay, additional questions, Senator Lowe.
I'm just a simple guy. So we got.
I get very concerned when I hear you say that, Senator.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So we have 3 votes, correct, in our.
Well, we have 5 votes.
Or 5 votes, excuse me. So we split our votes, right? And so we don't then send a full 5 votes one way. So that means we're diluting those 5 votes, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, any additional questions? All right.
Thank you,
for
Mr.
your
Chair.
testimony.
Thank you, members of the committee.
All right, we will now go to proponents of LB 764. Those in support of LB 764, come on up. Welcome back to the Government Committee.
Thank you, Senator Brewer and other senators on the committee. I'm more prepared. I have a statement with this one, written statement. My name is Steve Davies, Stevedavies, and I testify in support of LB 764. 48 states use the winner-take-all principle in selecting delegates to the Electoral College. It is time for Nebraska to do the same. It will level the playing field for our state. Electoral College is our republic idea of our founding. And if we have an opportunity to split off part of our electoral votes, we are less valuable to any candidate. If they win Nebraska, they may not get all of our votes, or in every other state they do. So we're playing hardball with softball rules. Thank you, senators.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Hang on, let me see if we got any questions. Questions for Steve? All right, thank you for your testimony. All right, additional proponents to LB 764. Connie, welcome back to the Government Committee.
Thank you. Connie Renke, Rennike, I'm sorry. You know, I hear this debate back and forth of Republicans and Democrats, and it's so difficult to listen to this. And I think about, what if it's not Democrats taking advantage or Republicans taking advantage? What if it's an outside source, another country, another power, a globalist agenda that's taking over our state of Nebraska? And I'm very concerned about that. And so the bickering between Democrat and Republican on a lot of this stuff, it's just, I saw COVID happen and it scared people to death. My brother-in-law passed away from it at 48 years old. It was horrible. It scared everyone. Everyone wanted to stay home and do mail-in ballots. I went and listened to Dr. Frank, and he spoke about the algorithms in Nebraska, that every single county has that same algorithm. We are being duped. We are being taken over by another power. And it's not a matter of Republicans and Democrats. It's about a source, an outside source trying to take over and take down Nebraska and our nation. And I listened to Dr. Frank on the algorithm. I went out myself and went to 3,000 homes in Nebraska. And I found people that went to vote and they were told they already voted. I was told people received 4 ballots. One family, 8 ballots. All of these things, the first couple, I thought this is just an odd thing that happened. But when you see it over and over and over again, there is corruption. There is election corruption. And so, yes, I am a proponent of this, because what's happened in the last 10 years with our elections is horrendous. And I believe the people of Nebraska have conservative values, and that's what we're seeing with our elections, is gradually they're being taken over. And that's why I support this bill, because I believe we're conservatives and that this should be passed.
Thank you.
I forgot to hand out
Yeah,
this.
pages,
Can I still do
Yeah,
that?
give it the pages.
This has the multiple ballots in each county where it was recorded they had them. So it was not just in Lincoln. And this is such a huge concern.
All right, any questions for Connie? All right, thank you for your testimony.
You're welcome.
All right, next proponent.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, my name is Richard Jost, RICHARD-JOST from Bellevue. Came a long ways here today just to state my opinion. So when it comes to national elections, Nebraska should speak with a single voice. While searching for some of those election results, I came across an interesting clip from CBS News that serves as a reminder and a warning. That single electoral college vote that hangs out there puts a huge target squarely on District 2, inviting every sort of corruption to take that vote. Well, why? It's only a single vote. Well, CBS News was very well aware of this. I have a clip called "Presidential Election Could Come Down to a Congressional District in Nebraska." May I play that? It's just over a minute. It's I just quoted this. It's from CBS News. It's Major Garrett.
No, that would be like a demonstration. We can't do that.
Okay, that's
But
what I
you
wanted
can
to
talk
ask.
away. You
Okay.
still got your time.
So basically, and I wish you could hear it because, and I also put this online, so it's on record, the URL for this particular video. And it's at 1 minute and 21 seconds, or 1 minute and 20 seconds is where they start talking about Nebraska. It's only a 3-minute clip, but I had it down to 1 minute for you guys. Basically, it's after midnight, CBS News, the 2020 election's going on. And they have the map of the U.S. up there, and they're choosing between, well, if Wisconsin goes, well, what if Pennsylvania goes, or what if North Carolina goes, the whole 9 yards, what if Arizona goes? There was a scenario that should be scary to everyone here, in that it was 269 and 269, and they said, And there's Nebraska out there, Nebraska NE2. Oh, it's not from the periodic tables, whatever, whatever, it's just trying to be fun. But basically, that one vote put Biden at 270 to 269. While they were still talking about all the different scenarios that could come out once the voting was, once they stopped counting on all the votes. But that was something that could have happened. So basically, my only real point about all this is that's pretty scary. And secondly, Trump won by 19 points in 2020. And here we are, so that disenfranchises, in my mind, 60% of the voters in Nebraska to allow that one electoral college vote to go the other way. So I am absolutely in favor of 764.
All right. Let's see if I have questions. Questions?
Please.
You got one?
No. I-
Oh. Did you have
Okay.
one? Yes.
Thank you, Mr.
Senator
Yost,
Rayburn.
for coming to testify. But I think in 2020, I Googled it real quick here. President Biden won 306 electoral votes to former President
Right.
Trump's 232. And I think it's, I'm just going to throw out my opinion and then you can tell me and share with yours. I think that's an exciting thing to think that our state of Nebraska was that influential with our one vote. That, to me, that's what democracy is all about. It just takes one vote in most of our elections to win a race. And so to go ahead and share with me, the question to you is, why is that not a good and exciting thing to be a state that could be making history?
Because you're down to a smaller, granted, it's Omaha, it's a bigger section of Nebraska, but you're basically getting, instead of having Nebraska speak as a whole, you're having Omaha speak for the entire country. I don't think that's fair. I think that disenfranchises not just the people in the western Nebraska, but pretty much everybody outside of Omaha.
So you think it's okay to have the other 4 votes speak for?
Well, that's how they voted.
Okay. And
So
that's
yes,
how
that's definitely fair, you bet.
okay, and that's how that one district voted. So.
Well, and again, it still disfranchises the other people. It's a national election. This is not a district election. It's not a legislative election. It's national. And so just like the governor, just like the SOS, it's a winner take all. And that's just my opinion. And I think we should go back to the way it was.
Okay, thank you so much.
You bet.
All right. Any additional questions? All right. Thank you for your testimony. All right. We're still on proponents to LB 764. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Good afternoon, Senators. My name is Linda Vermooten, Linda Vermooten. The fundamental question I want to ask us is, what was the intention of our founding fathers when they wrote our Constitution? They wrote a Constitution for a republic, not a democracy, because they had seen what could happen if we, quote, have a democracy and how easily that can lead to a tyranny. They fled Europe for a good reason. They came here to establish a new country, to be free and to exercise their rights and to allow every vote to be counted. They set up these electoral colleges. If we were saying, well, one man, one vote, then you understand what you're saying. Nebraska would never vote again, because between New York City and California, the rest of the country wouldn't matter if you're going to go with population. So I was very upset and appalled when I saw that our electoral vote was split. Because what that said is anybody outside the Omaha metro area, anyone outside that district, their vote was lessened. And we gave more power to the most populated area of our state. That then is the danger. Because if you start that trend, like I said, if you follow that trend, New York City already controls all of New York, and all the New Yorkers know that. So you're saying to us, we want Omaha with more people than Lincoln, with more people than the rural areas to have more of an important say. Everything, and the 48 states disagree with us. Only one does what we do. All the other states have pretty much followed winner takes all. If you get the votes in that state, all electoral votes go to that candidate. And I want to ask us that we would return to that. We did it for decades. We did it for a century, in fact. Why now do we think suddenly we have to split it? We have an election. Yes, we have an election. It's called into question, as the former testifier said, what about the algorithms? When you look in every single county, they are exactly identical for our state, which is an impossibility. It's a mathematical impossibility, which says clearly that there was some interference with the election. So it begs the question, did our election really turn out the way that we are told our election turned out? And I think as long as we have these machines, no. We have no idea how it really turned out because we can't even see the real ballots if we wish to do a hand count. And I think we need to be careful if we stay on this road. I think we need to follow what 48 states are doing. That's been an argument that's been used in many committees. Well, so many states are doing this, we should do that. Well, I want to use that same argument in this committee. If 48 states are doing that, I think we should follow them and revert to winner takes all. And I thank Senator Lippincott for bringing this forward. Thank you, senators.
Thank you. All right, let's see if we got questions for you. Questions, Senator Holland.
Thank you, Chairman. You're a first generation, if I recall from previous testimonies, aren't you a first
I'm
generation?
a naturalized citizen, yes, sir.
Naturalized. And your family came from?
I'm originally from South Africa.
South Africa.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I commend you on your understanding of the Constitution and the fact that we're a republic and the basis for what the founding fathers set up with the Electoral College. I wish more people understood that. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Senator. You're required to study all of that stuff in detail when you do your naturalization, and when you become a citizen, you have to pass the examination.
Okay, additional questions? All right, thank you, Leonard, for your testimony. All right, we are still on proponents of LB 764. No additional proponents. We will transition to opponents to LB 764. Welcome back to the Government Committee.
Let's see. Good afternoon, Chairman Brewer and members of the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. My name is Jaden Perkins, and I'm here representing myself and the thousands of voters in Omaha that would like to keep our split electoral vote. I come before you today as a grassroots community organizer who is strongly opposed to LB 764
Jaden,
because...
Can we have you spell your name so we get it on the record?
JADENPERKINS.
Thank you.
I come before you today as a grassroots community organizer who is strongly opposed to LB 764 because this bill is another form of voter disenfranchisement. In 2020, during a deadly pandemic, many organizers like myself worked tirelessly to mobilize thousands of voters, specifically in North and South Omaha, to come out to the polls like never before because we knew that this was perhaps the most consequential election of our lifetimes. All of that hard work resulted in President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris gaining the Omaha-based 2nd District's electoral vote. And for the first time ever, a Black woman got to cast that vote on our district's behalf. This moment in history should be honored by simply keeping the split vote the way it is, not reversed because a certain party failed to win in the last election. The split vote encourages fair competition from presidential candidates, which results in robust voter turnout on election day. That's what makes democracy work for the people. If you truly believe in it, then you would vote to strike down this anti-democratic and anti-American piece of legislation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jaden. Let's see if we got questions. Questions. All right, thank you for your testimony. All right, other opponents to LB 764? welcome back to the Government Committee.
Good afternoon again, Senator Brewer, members of the Government, Veterans and Military Committee. I got that a little bit backwards, don't I? Al Davis, ALDAVIS, here appearing today as the registered lobbyist for the 3,000 members of the Nebraska chapter of the Sierra Club in opposition to LB 764. Many years ago, Nebraska began offering a more responsive electoral system when they instituted the current method of awarding electoral votes when voting for the President and Vice President of the United States. I think it behooves all of us to look back at the history of the winner-take-all election system, which was not envisioned by the Founding Fathers and is a long way from being a democratic process. And I just looked that up a minute ago. The first election where winner-take-all took place was 1824. And James Madison said he didn't think that the founders had intended that would be the development. But what happened was the big states wanted to expand their power, and so they developed the winner-take-all approach, and then the other small states had to follow along. So it didn't start out as a honorable thing. Winner-take-all was and still is a tool which the larger states and the dominant party would like to use as a weapon to drive policy. Every state should adopt a more moderate approach, similar to the one Nebraska uses, because winner-take-all really nullifies the intent of the voters and is undemocratic. Just as Iowa garners national attention as the first in the nation, the Nebraska approach drives national dollars and national attention to our state. National elections make every electoral vote important, as you said, and Nebraska has seen national attention and national dollars invested in our state to try and secure that one electoral vote. On top of ad revenue for newspapers, printers, social media, radio, and television, individuals are hired in the state to coordinate a winning campaign. National media attention is focused on our state, which generates interest and can lead to investment in the state. The Republican Party is the overwhelmingly dominant party in the state now, but that could change as the cities of Omaha and Lincoln grow while the 3rd District continues to lose population. It is conceivable that 20 years from now, Nebraska could become a blue state. My friends in the 3rd District would be apoplectic about winner-take-all if that happened. And I would just say, I just watched a news report last night about Oregon, where the western half of the state, or the eastern half of the state wants to succeed because they don't feel they're getting the attention from the West that they deserve. So you've got farmers in Oregon who are unhappy with the situation. I'm sure they're unhappy with the winner-take-all. Same thing in Illinois, same thing in California, where small minorities are disenfranchised. Former legislators crafted a good idea when the Nebraska system was instituted. It has worked well for over 2 decades. There's nothing to be gained by switching away from the existing procedure, and the ultimate loser will be good public policy and the voters. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. See if we have any questions. Senator Lowe.
Thank you, Senator Brewer, and thank you, Al, for coming to testify today.
Thank you.
When you were a senator, did you vote for winner-take-all?
I did.
And now you're opposed?
Yes, I am. I thought it through. In fact, Senator Evans made a reference to that. I was going to mention it. That was the filibuster that he referenced was my last year in the legislature, and the thing failed because there was a dispute about some exchanging of votes over a marijuana piece. So that's what happened to that one. But I think the more I've thought about it, the more I think that we are better served if the power that we have as a voter can be recognized. And, you know, I think that it's important to recognize that we have had people visit Nebraska, and, you know, you heard reference to the last testifier talked about how they talked about that one vote in Nebraska. So that was good. I mean, I thought that was a good thing for our state.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Senator Rebel.
Senator, did you ever feel disenfranchised representing your district in Nebraska in a rural community from the electoral process in our state? Okay, thank you.
All right, any additional questions? All right, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, next opponent to LB 764. Welcome back.
Good afternoon again, Senators. Thank you. I'm Sherry St. Clair, SHERI-STCLAIR, testifying on my own behalf this time in opposition to LB 764. Nebraska adopted the split vote system in hopes of attracting presidential candidates to the state that's usually ignored because it's reliably conservative. Unfortunately, since implementing the congressional district method in 1992, Nebraska Republicans have repeatedly attempted to overturn the voting framework in favor of a winner-take-all system. I really appreciate the work that many of our senators have done over the years to keep the split vote system. You know, Ernie Chambers said every person who casts a ballot should have the assurance that vote is going to count. So, you know, in reality, in all likelihood, the presidential race is not going to be so close that a single electoral vote is going to decide the outcome. But it's important for campaigns to compete everywhere that's competitive. The split vote system does keep Nebraska from being a completely flyover state, which I, as a voter, appreciate. So, you know, although it's my preference that the Electoral College be eliminated, you know, second best is to maintain the split vote system that we have. And I would hope that LB 674 doesn't advance.
All right, thank
My
you.
opinion.
Any questions for Sherry? All right, thanks again for your testimony.
Thank you.
Okay, any other opponents to LB 764?
Thank you. Shirley Niemeyer, SHIRLEY, NIEMEYER, and I oppose LB 764 for the following reasons. We have a representative democracy. A representative democracy stands out in sharp contrast to other forms of government, such as totalitarianism, authoritarianism, and fascism, which allow the people little or no representation. When a presidential or vice president election is held, and if 1/3 are not represented in their vote for the supported candidate in their district, then we take away their voice and their representation. If the congressional district population votes for one candidate, but then the total statewide vote goes to another candidate, is that representation government? I want to feel that my vote counts in my district and for the state and federal governments. We in the U.S. have a very strong support for winner takes all first, but I value those who come in second and third or last. We must have a difference of backgrounds and experiences and beliefs to have the best government in Nebraska. Diversity of ideas is what makes a strong outcome and a strong Nebraska. Diversity is essential for a democracy along with an educated voter. We need diversity, integrity, and honesty, but without dissension and attacks. And I quote, diversity is a key ingredient for better decision-making among teams. Homogeneous groups may be susceptible to groupthink, while diverse teams can leverage a greater variety of perspectives and are likely to consider information more thoroughly and accurately. According to McKinsey, companies ranking in the top quartile of executive board diversity were 35% likelier to financially outperform the industry medians. Other research finds the inclusive teams make better decisions, make better business decisions 87% of the time. Diversity is an action, inclusive is a culture, and belonging is a feeling. And I've sourced that. But I feel strongly, and I've been a Republican, a Democrat, and an independent, and I vote across party lines. And I'm extremely conservative. But I feel sometimes my vote doesn't matter. And I noticed when Saunders County was made part of the district in Omaha, you know, mostly Saunders County is Republican. So I looked at that, you know, with questions. Why did that happen? You know, and I just thought maybe they wanted to dilute them, that district in Omaha. I don't know. I don't have any idea of what happened, and I wasn't a part of it, but I did have questions about that. So I really don't want my vote taken away from me if I'm voting different than the predominant party in Nebraska, and I agree that Young people are voting independent more and more in the Democratic Party, and older people vote more Republican. So in 10, 20, 30 years, it may be a completely different majority. And so keep that in mind as you think about this. And I really appreciate you listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, thank you for your testimony. Okay. Any additional opponents? Welcome back.
Hello, Chairman Brewer and committee members. My name is Heidi Ewing, Heidiuhing. I'm the Public Policy Director for Civic Nebraska, and I'll be speaking in opposition to LB 764. We think Maine and Nebraska got it right. The argument for our congressional district method is that it provides more localized representation for all Nebraska voters. A district's vote cannot be overridden by the statewide popular vote. This also puts districts in play that otherwise would be ignored on a presidential campaign. Because Nebraska's second district can swing either way, it has brought more presidential candidates on the campaign trail and thus more opportunity for voters to engage with them directly. For these reasons, we support the current method of awarding electoral votes and oppose LB 764.
All right, thank you. All right, questions for Heidi? All right, thank you. Okay, any additional opponents? Welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Jane Sue, Janeseu, and I'm testifying on behalf of the ACLU of Nebraska in opposition to LB 764. Voting is the cornerstone of our democracy and the fundamental right upon which all of our civil liberties rest. Nebraska is a vastly diverse state in terms of our geographical politics. In order to respect and honor that diversity inherent within our state, our electors to select the president and the vice president are divided along congressional lines. While many other states operate a winner-take-all system for these electors, Nebraska is not and should not be one of them. In the 2016 presidential election, it did not matter if we voted for Democratic, Republican, or independent candidates. 46% of our votes did not count. With the winner-take-all strategy, that made certain that anyone not agreeing with the majority of the voters in their home state would have their votes discarded before the Electoral College convening. So out of approximately 136 million votes cast, more than 64 million votes were not represented by their electors. To be clear, the Electoral College system is not the problem here. The problem lies in systematically disenfranchising the minority votes through a winner-take-all system. The system would allow electors to disregard the will of Nebraskans. Nebraska has correctly chosen to let the will of the people to be reflected in our electoral votes by splitting electors along the congressional district lines. This will should be respected and supported as Nebraska derives all of its powers, according to the First Amendment of our state constitution, from the consent of the governed. I should mention that, the origin really, and I think some other testifiers said this, was to bring presidential candidates to our state and to pay attention to the voters of our state. And I think our state has been able to benefit from that over the years. So with that, we urge you to definitely postpone this bill. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Questions? Senator Lowe.
Thank you, Ms. Sue. Since ACLU is a national organization, are they trying to switch the Electoral College across the country then too? Since you're trying to keep us from going to the way the rest of the country has gone.
Sure. I think the ACLU's interest is really that in terms of the voting context is that all eligible voters have access to the right to the vote and that those votes matter. So, or, are counted and reflected accurately. I can't say for certain whether the national ACLU has taken a position on the Electoral College system.
Are you saying the other 48 states don't offer the person, the vote as being balanced? Because they don't split up their Electoral College votes, so people don't. What do you think about that?
So just, really from like a mathematical perspective, this is, what I can offer is that, winner take all system kind of favors or at least it kind of what I talked about is that it does not really reflect every voter if that vote is not in line with the majority of their state, because once that state has reached a certain threshold, all their electoral college votes go towards that candidate, even if a number of the voters in that state, perhaps in a certain congressional district, voted for a different candidate. Those votes won't be reflected.
Thank you.
Okay, any additional questions? All right, thank you for your testimony. Okay, additional opponents. Welcome back to the Government Committee.
Chairman Brewer, members of the committee. Again, my name is Gavin Geiss, spelled G-A-V-I-N-G-E-I-S. I'll be very, very brief. Most of the comments made today we would agree with. In opposition, we oppose LB 764 as well. The only argument I would make is that if we return to winner take all, we will certainly have less of a stake in presidential elections. Looking at the 2020 elections and the states surrounding us, only Iowa received any visits or real attention from presidential candidates. Looking at Kansas, Missouri, Colorado, Wyoming, and South Dakota, none of them received visits from presidential candidates and received very little attention overall in terms of focus. And if we return to a system winner take all, I think we'd be on par with them. We will be ignored by candidates, and that should be explained. Most of the plain states are ignored by candidates, but because we do it differently, because there's something they can fight over, they pay attention to us. And for that reason alone, I think it's worth keeping the system we have. It brings them here. It makes them sell themselves to us. That's what they should be doing. They should be doing it to all the states. But because of how the Electoral College works, that's not how it turns out. And so the plain states get ignored. And so merely from the stake of pay attention to Nebraska, sell yourselves to us, I think it's worth keeping the system we have. That is all I want to share. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Gavin. Let's see if we have questions. Senator Rabel.
Thank you, Mr. Geiss. Do you happen to know, or do you recall how many times former President Trump came to visit Nebraska?
In 2020, he came as at an airport stop in Omaha. So yes, he for sure did that. And in other outside of the electoral process, I'm not sure, but I do know he did make one stop here in Nebraska.
So can you share with us how are the three congressional districts divided? Are they divided by
Population.
And so the population is even
Is
Steven?
as equally as possible, right? There are margins of error between the three districts, but we allow we allow for some leeway, but we try to keep it very low. So yes, population equally as possible.
And so currently we have 2 votes that are winner take all. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Representing.
Right. We look at the statewide count and we distribute those according to the winner take all system.
So those are winner take all. And then the other 3 districts are by
Majority of those
vote in
districts.
those districts.
Correct.
Which I'm going to follow through, represent the majority opinion of that specific district.
That's the goal, right? Yes.
And so I know that we've heard from representatives from Omaha that were arguing, well, we want our voices heard for any candidate. And so I think their argument is, we're not diluting it. We're just having our voices heard and our votes counted.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. I think that's the argument everyone's making on both sides of this. We want our voices heard, right? We're failing to see each other's agency and having our voices heard a little.
And I don't know if you happen to know this, because we heard some folks talk about Oregon is unhappy with the eastern half they feel that they're not on the same page with the western half. Is the state of Oregon talking about going our route, perhaps doing it by district?
There are not many states that have really looked at going our route. There have been bills introduced throughout the country over the last 20 years that propose it, but never really gains traction. So no, not seriously. We're kind of alone still.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And if I remember right, is it the plan they want to lob off the eastern part and become part of Idaho?
I'll leave that up to them.
Yeah, well, that's a tough road to hoe there. All right, thank you. Any other questions for Gavin? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any additional opponents to LB 764? Anybody here neutral? We will welcome Senator Lippincott back. Oh, I got to read the letters in before we let anybody go on this one. Proponents, 57, opponents, 34, and 0 in the neutral. And Senator Lippincott ways closed, so we will reset for LB 364.
Oh, that's me.
That's you.
Oh,
You're up.
That's me.
We're gonna let a few more people move out here before we get started, so we don't have as much noise for you.
Much noise at all.
I was holding up because the rates were leaving. I thought they were all gonna leave and we'd be done, but, oh wow, we still got a ways to go. All right, Senator Hunt, welcome to your committee, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chairman Brewer and my colleagues on the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. I'm Megan Hunt, MEGAN-HUNT, and I represent District 8 in Midtown Omaha. I'm here to introduce LB 364, which would require that all county election commissioners be elected rather than appointed. I'm carrying this bill forward after a few previous bills from Senator Matt Hansen. When Senator Hansen last brought the bill in 2021, he asked the committee not to take any action on the bill because there were court proceedings unfolding at the time that could have affected the bill. Since then, that has all been settled, so I wanted to revisit the issue. In 2019, Civic Nebraska approached Sen about what appeared to be a conflict between our statutes and the Nebraska Constitution when it comes to the appointment of county election commissioners. Article 9, Section 4 of the Nebraska Constitution states that all county officers must be elected, while the statute provides for county election commissioners to be appointed either by the governor or by the county board, depending on the county size. So the question at hand was whether county election commissioners were indeed county officers and thus subject to that constitutional election requirement that we have for other county offices or not, and thus subject to the statutes. Senator Hansen requested and received in 2019 an Attorney General's opinion on that matter. And the Attorney General said that our statutes authorizing the appointment of election commissioners were, quote, constitutionally suspect, and predicted that the statutes would be overturned if brought to the state Supreme Court. After that, a case was brought in Lancaster County District Court on behalf of a voter who challenged our statutes. The district court judge in that case ruled that our statutes are constitutional, contrary to the interpretation in the Attorney General's opinion. The AG's office appealed that decision, sending it to the higher Nebraska State Supreme Court. The Supreme Court affirmed the lower court's ruling, upholding the constitutionality of the statutes. The court's conclusion was that the Constitution gives broad authority to the legislature to determine the necessity of choosing county officers by election, and that the legislature has determined by passing laws that election commissioners and their deputies are not county officers. Basically, the court said that the legislature has made it clear that it does not intend to consider county election commissioners as county officers that must be elected because of the statutes we've enacted. That brings me to where things stand with LB 364. Excuse me. Just because the court did not find our statutes unconstitutional does not mean that we don't have a good reason to change them or clarify them. In Nebraska, all of our other county officers are elected pursuant to that constitutional provision. The Attorney General opinion described how county election commissioners meet the definition of county officers in that they take oaths, they have a set term of 4 years, they are responsible for enforcing the Election Act and promulgating rules and regulations under the Act. The Supreme Court's reasoning for upholding the statutes was largely based on the legislature's authority to make and enact laws about the Election Act and enforcement thereof. So nothing is saying that we can't change it, and they affirmed that the legislature has the full authority to do so. The fact that in our largest and some of our mid-sized counties, the people in charge of objectively and neutrally administering the Election Act are appointed by a governor or county board and not the people of that county seems wrong. For Nebraskans to have faith in the integrity of their county's election systems, they must have a voice in selecting the most appropriate person to lead them. I think the communities know best, and it is they who should get to choose their election commissioner. LB 364 provides that county election commissioners are elected, and it eliminates the appointment of their deputies. They can still hire staff to support the work of their office. In the vast majority of counties, an elected county clerk is already handling election duties. Why should the citizens in some counties get to elect their elections official, but not others? It makes sense that the person in charge of a county's elections should be accountable to its voters, just like all other county officers are. With that, I would be happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you. Let's see if I have some questions for you. Questions for Senator Hunt? Yes, Senator Riggle.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. In some of the rulings, or I guess the opinion of the AG, how far back did they check the history? How long have we kind of carved out the election commissioners in the county are appointed? Did it say how long back that?
Can you restate the question? I'm not sure I understand.
So the question is, how long have we in Nebraska been having our election commissioners appointed? Is it for like 30, 40, 50 years? I know as a county commissioner, we had to run for office. So as did the county sheriff, as the county attorney, they all have to run for office. And so I always wondered why the election commissioner was appointed. Each county election commissioner.
I'm skimming the opinion right now, and
I'm just curious.
It looks like maybe 1937, but
1937.
I should be careful about saying that on the record without reading it more carefully.
I'm just kind of curious because as a county commissioner, I thought it was odd.
This is definitely knowable information, so I wish I could say it on the record right now, but we'll get it on the record at some point. Thank you.
All right. Any additional questions? Yes, Senator Halloran.
Thank you, Chairman Brewer. Thanks for this bill. So you made a comment that having election commissioners appointed feels wrong.
Forget I said feels. I know you hate that word. Pretend I said that I think we should do it a different way.
You're asking me to erase something from my memory bank.
Just delete the hard drive, yeah.
Well, I think sometimes first impressions are the best impressions.
They're hard to forget, aren't they?
They are hard to forget. So I'm having some difficulty wrapping my arms around the reason why, the benefit for election versus appointment, or what's the harm of the appointment process.
I might have said seems wrong. That's what my notes say anyway. But I think, as I said, we elect our county officers. There are some election commissioners who are elected and some who are appointed, and I think we should do it the same way. And I think we can trust the people in these counties to select the person who's going to administer the Elections Act in that county. I would give it to the voters. I'm not afraid of letting the voters select their election commissioner.
Part of the process we're looking at here, I think, and I'm going to draw a parallel with the legislature. We make elections of certain people, committee chairs, for example, within the legislature, the body. The voters vet us as legislators to represent them, and then we carry on with duties from that point on in the legislature, according to the rules. And so with the legislature, we don't allow for the voters to vote for committee chairs, for example. It's done by us as a body to appoint those as chairs. How is that? To me, there's a strong parallel between that and what we're doing with appointing election commissioners.
I'll have to think about that. I feel like we don't let the voters, we don't let all of our constituents vote on the bills that we vote on. We don't let them vote on if bills are coming out of committee. And obviously I'm saying obvious things, but this is just a question of representation. I mean, what if the president of the United States appointed all the state senators? What if, because the governor can appoint the election commissioner. So to me, it's just a question of who is this county official accountable to? Is it accountable to the executive branch? Are they accountable to whoever appointed them? Or are they accountable to the voters that they're actually representing? And I just don't think there's ever harm in more accountability to voters.
So will we run into the same situation with electing commissioners that we discussed previously on having a primary in the election process and the politics involved in that process if we elect them?
Probably.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Senator Brewer.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Just jumping back to what the AG's office said, I think the AG's office thought that it was unusual that the election commissioners were their county officers, but the AG's office thought it was unusual. I think it's unusual too. However, having served in county government, I think it's also unusual that we elect our county engineer, our sheriff, and some of these other offices. It just seems like a very antiquated form of government. But having said that, when I think of an election commissioner, their office is quite important. And just like in some of the counties, it becomes the responsibility of the county clerk to manage and be in charge of the elections, which is a very important, here we are talking about elections quite a bit in this committee, and it's so important. And so I do think it's unusual, particularly when the AG flags something like this and writes an opinion. But Senator Hunt, what else did the AG's office say? I know you read something in their opinion about them being treated as county officers, or I don't remember, sorry.
Yes, and to answer your previous question, in the AG opinion, it says Nebraska has had a statute requiring the governor to appoint an election commissioner in a county of a certain population since 1913. And I think all of us have learned in our short time as lawmakers that sometimes the reason for laws is weird. And it doesn't mean it's bad or not working, but it doesn't mean it might not necessarily be consistent. And this is certainly not consistent, like the way we appoint or elect all kinds of county officials. And again, it doesn't mean it's not working. Elections are happening. It's all going well. We have a secure election system in Nebraska, but I still think that it would be improved with more accountability to the voters in those counties. Thank you.
Any additional questions for Senator Hunt? All right, thank you. You'll stick around to close?
Thank you.
All right. Okay, we're going to begin with proponents to LB 364. Welcome back to the Government Committee.
Thank you, Chairman Brewer and committee members. My name is Heidi Ewing, HEIDIUHING. I'm the Public Policy Director for Civic Nebraska, and I'm here in strong support of LB 364. Election commissioners in 3 counties, Douglas, Lancaster, and Sarpy, are currently appointed by the governor, while county commissioners do the appointing in Buffalo, Cass, Hall, and Platte counties. All told, these 7 counties make up more than 60% of the state's voting population. Civic Nebraska has maintained that all county election commissioners, including those in the state's most populous counties, should be accountable to the voters and be elected in accordance with the Nebraska Constitution. This has been our position since at least 2012, when we first brought it to legislators and state officials' attention. The statutes in question require counties that reach certain population thresholds to allow the governor or county board to appoint county election commissioners. Civic Nebraska has asserted that these statutes are in violation of Article 9, Section 4 of the Nebraska Constitution, which defines necessary county officers and plainly states that those officers are to be chosen by voters. In 2019, Nebraska Attorney General Doug Peterson was on the side of our legal action, but the Nebraska Secretary of State sided with the current law. The AG asked the Nebraska Supreme Court to, 1, claim jurisdiction over the matter, and 2, rule that these state statutes are in fact a violation of our state constitution. The Supreme Court agreed to hear the case in 2019, but then moved it to Lancaster County District Court after the two sides could not agree upon a common set of facts by a November deadline. On January 14th, 2021, Judge Lori Merritt ruled the statute was constitutional. The Attorney General's office then appealed the ruling, putting it back in the hands of the Nebraska Supreme Court. And on August 20th, 2021, the court affirmed Judge Merritt's ruling, saying that the legislature has determined that election commissioners and chief deputies are not county officers. So that basically puts it back in the legislature's court, where you folks can decide yourselves whether or not you want to consider them to be official county officials, and could pass statute accordingly. So this would be more unified statewide, which is what we are encouraging you to do. I've included a timeline here that does confirm what Senator Hunt said, that this change was made in 1913. And then to your question, Senator Halloran, I think you were asking, what's the downside of the current system, aside from our concerns about representation, is that when these officials are appointed, they're a known member of a political party. And in order to create balance in those offices, they're required to also provide a deputy commissioner of the opposing party or a different party. So we could save the expense of having to have these deputy commissioners if these were elected positions.
All right, any additional questions?
This is great.
Question. All right, thank you, Heidi.
Thanks so much.
Okay, next, proponent. Welcome back to the Government Committee.
Thank you, Senators, and thank you for letting me go 4 for 4 today, like home run time. Sherry St. Clair, SHERI, STCLAIR, testifying on behalf of legal and voters as a proponent of LB 364. This would give the counties of Douglas, Lancaster, and Sarpy the right to elect their own election commissioner. The past 110 years, particularly in Douglas County, voters have been denied the right to do this. This goes back to the Honest Election Law of 1913, which was passed by the legislature because of questionable election methods at that time. Once corrections were made in the procedures, that law was never repealed. It was, however, amended so that any county with a population greater than 100,000 would no longer be able to elect their county election commissioner, who would instead be appointed by the governor. So this impacts the 3 counties as mentioned. Lancaster County reached this population threshold in 1930. Sarpy reached it in 1990. So we feel that since the reasons behind this whole honest election law of 1913 no longer exist, the voters of these counties should have, subsequently still lost the right to vote for their election commissioners because of their size, not because of election fraud that's ongoing. So we urge the committee to advance 364 for full floor debate.
All right, thank you. See if we don't have some questions. Questions for Sherry? All right, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Senators.
All right, any additional proponents? Anybody here in opposition? Beth, welcome back to the Government Committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Brewer, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Beth, B-E-T-H, Bazin, B-A-Z-Y-N, Farrell, F-E-R-R-E-L-L. I'm with the Nebraska Association of County Officials. I'm appearing in opposition to LB 364. You've heard about the history of how this got to be to this point with the AG's opinion, the Lancaster County District Court case, Nebraska Supreme Court case. I just want to let you know, NACO filed an amicus brief with the district court and with the Nebraska Supreme Court on the side of the election commissioners. We looked at the issue of whether they were officers, the election commissioners were officers, and whether they had to be elected. The Supreme Court said that they would not have to be elected, but the legislature has the authority to determine whether they should be elected. We have no issue with that, but we would respectfully disagree that they need to be elected. We think the system that's in place right now is working just fine. Each election commissioner has a deputy that is of a different party than they are, and we think that that's an appropriate check and balance so that election doesn't necessarily need to be done for election commissioners. Election commissioners were first put into office in 1913. What was happening was in Omaha at that time, there was a real political machine that was sort of taking control of things. Ballots ended up in the river, those kinds of things. And so the legislature enacted the Honest Election Act to try and tamp that down. And that included putting election commissioners in place to handle that. As you've heard, the process now is sort of a three-tiered process. In counties over 100,000, the election commissioner is appointed by the governor. In counties of 20,000 to 100,000, the county board can make a decision of whether they want to have an appointed election commissioner or not. There are 3 counties where that's the case. Buffalo, Hall, and Platte County have appointed election commissioners. Cass County used to, but they changed that last fall. So this bill would affect not only the counties over 100,000, but it would also affect those 3 counties. In this case, Platte County, their population is under 40,000, so they would have to go to an ex officio for an election commissioner. In Buffalo and Hall County, those election commissioners would have to be elected. So those are the practical impacts of this bill. Again, we think the system is working fine, and we would just prefer to leave it as is. I would be happy to answer questions.
All right, thank you, Desmond. Leave it as is. Okay. Questions? Questions, all right. Thank you, Beth. All right, any additional opposition to, opposed to LB 364?
There's only one. We only need one copy.
Connie, welcome back to the government committee.
Thank you. Connie Renke, CONNIREINKE. I am in opposition to this. I did think about the concerns that we've had with voting and elections and that type of thing. I did give a handout to you that says it's named why we should get rid of the rigged election machines and mail-in voting. This has some of the top reasons why we believe that the election was fraudulent. We are concerned with the Secretary of State and his role and not looking into these issues. But the opposite of that is that as our elections continue to not be stopped, the election fraud being stopped, this continues to go more and more in the wrong direction. And so I do not believe that this is a good bill. I'm just concerned about that. I believe, as I said before, that the state of Nebraska is conservative and so I believe that there are good judgments being made in those areas, even though there has been concern with looking at some of these issues. As we go forward, I believe that there is corruption in our elections and that we do need to deal with this. And you as a body have a big responsibility to do that. As we've talked with counties, they say, well, we want to hear what the legislators have to say and their control that they've given to Bob Evans. So I'm asking all of you to stand and support the election integrity bills and enforce the things that need to be enforced. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Connie. Let's see if we have questions. Okay, any questions for Connie? Questions? All right, thank you again for your testimony. All right, looking for any additional opponents to LB 364. Welcome back to the Government Committee.
Good afternoon again.
Yes.
Linda Vermooten, Linda Vermooten. And I'm in opposition to this bill because I'm listening to the bill and the senator presented it, and some of the questions that I had is if the AG and if the courts are saying that our county commissioners are not considered to be, what was the word? Officer. Thank you. I was thinking officer of the court, but it's not a court, so that's where I went back. But to be considered officers, it's the officers that represent us. It's those ones that we elect. And if they're not considered to be officers, then I don't see why we would need to elect them. If we've had this working apparently fairly well for over 100 years in our state and in our counties, and it's going to impact different counties differently if we go to electing, why do we want to say now, all of a sudden, we're not going to trust the governor that we have elected, whoever that might be? That's where we have the say. We have the say in who we choose to be our governor, because from my understanding, it's the governor that then appoints. And I think there's a check and balance already in place. I know in my county, in Sabi County, I have met both the commissioner and the deputy. And they are from different parties, and they came and did the training when we were serving at the election polls. So I said, if there's already a check and a balance in place, that's how we know that they're then being accountable, because they're holding each other accountable, so to say. Not all positions necessarily have that check and balance in place. I think that's a very good check and balance. And then I would also kind of express the concern that we're not so sure at the moment how secure our elections are. I know that we have been told that over and over, but if you tell the same lie over and over and over, then people will eventually believe it. We saw that in Nazi Germany, and we've seen that in Russia. We've seen that in lots of parts of the history. So, the question is, as long as we have the machines and we can't see these ballots, then we don't really know how the elections are going. I'd be more concerned about trying to bring about some change in that area than in our commissioner. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, questions for Linda? All right, thank you for your testimony. Okay, any additional opponents to LB 364? Anybody here in the neutral? All right, we will welcome Senator Hunt back up. Should wave and close. Got some letters to read in. Boy, I'm slow today. Proponents, we have 3. Opponents, we have 21, and we have 0 in the neutral. That will complete our hearing on LB 364 and complete our government hearings for the day.